Sarah passed away. I received a call while I was taking care of my daughter, Sarah's child. According to the police, Sarah and her husband Spencer were hit by a car while crossing an intersection, and soon after, they passed away. The sudden news left me in shock. My heart raced and I felt dizzy. Sarah had been laughing with us just a few hours ago. I rushed to confirm the news, and from that point on, there was no time to grieve as I was overwhelmed with various procedures. During this time, a discussion about the future of Sarah's triplets with Spencer's parents, Susan and Isaac, came up. When I asked Susan and Isaac about what would happen to Sarah and Spencer's children, Susan said something unbelievable. "What should we do with the kids? They hassle. Maybe put them in a facility." I wondered if my ears were deceiving me. The feeling of disbelief filled my heart. During Sarah's life, the triplets had lived with their grandparents on their father's side. Despite us not seeing them as often, our emotional attachment to the grandchildren should have been much deeper. "Aren't you worried about the future of your adorable grandchildren?" I asked. "They should have adored them so much." "It's all right. My husband and I will take care of Sarah and Spencer's children with all our love." Nearly 20 years have passed since then. Though we faced many challenges, I am proud that all three have grown into fine adults. I never forgot the sadness of losing Sarah and Spencer, but I always thought of living happily for their sake too. Then one day, the doorbell rang suddenly. When I opened the door, there stood Susan and Isaac, whom I hadn't seen in years. Susan and Isaac ignored my surprise, entered, and faced the triplets. Then they said something unbelievable. "Would you like to live with us again?" "My name is Kennedy. My husband Harold was my high school classmate. We started dating then and got married after becoming working adults. At the age of 27, we were blessed with a child. Her name was Sarah. As our only daughter, we devoted all our love to her. Sarah grew up to be a bright and energetic child. When Sarah became a college student, she introduced us to her boyfriend, Spencer, who was a year older than her. One day, she approached us with a request. "Mom, I'd like you to keep the end of this month, Sunday, free. Dad too. We have something we want to discuss. It's about Spencer and me." The end of this month? Sure. Harold has the day off, so that's fine. But what's it about? "I'll explain everything then. Sorry, but please make sure you're free that day, and tell Dad not to go fishing." I was curious about what was going on, but Sarah wouldn't say more until the day. Lost in a whirlwind of thoughts, I awaited the day. When it finally arrived, Sarah mentioned that the discussion would be at Spencer's family home, which I somewhat expected. Such occasions where both families come together to talk are rare after all. Never having met Spencer's parents before, my nerves were barely concealed as we made our way to their house. "Nice to meet you. I'm Spencer's mother. Please come in." "Nice to meet you. We appreciate your hospitality." We were greeted by Spencer's mother, Susan. My nervousness only grew with Susan's monotone voice, as it did seem very welcoming upon entering their house. It was clear from the start that something was off. Spencer's father, Isaac, and Spencer were already seated, and an uneasy atmosphere hung in the air. We sat down in front of Spencer's family, ready to listen. Slowly, Spencer began to speak. "Sarah and I are expecting a child. We apologize for the sudden news, but please allow us to marry and have this child." Despite his nervousness, Spencer made sure to look us in the eyes as he spoke. They were not yet married, and both were still students. You could tell he expected opposition. His voice trembled slightly. After Spencer finished, silence ensued. Gathering my courage, I voiced my concerns about them proceeding with the pregnancy. "Do you understand what it means to have a child? What about school? How do you plan to support yourselves? You've never worked before. It's more challenging than you think." Following that, Spencer's parents, Susan and Isaac, also opposed the idea, deeming them too young. "Don't be ridiculous. You're still children yourselves, talking about marriage and a baby. Who do you think has been paying for your education, you ingrates?" Their words were a torrent of anger. However, Sarah and Spencer's determination was much stronger than expected, unwavering in their decision to have the baby. After much discussion, Sarah and Spencer pleaded with us again. "Please, we've talked about this over and over, promising to overcome any hardship together. Please." Hearing Sarah's almost disappearing voice stirred something in me. Sarah had always been such a good child, never once demanding, and now, for the first time, she was conveying her wishes to us with all her might. Although I initially opposed, as we talked more, I began to understand the depth of their commitment. I could see their resolve was genuine. Still somewhat anxious, I decided to support their decision to marry and have the baby if that was what Sarah wanted. Sarah seemed relieved by my support, but Spencer's parents remained steadfastly opposed. If you absolutely cannot accept it, then Spencer and I will cut ties. That way, we won't be a burden, right? Sensing the conversation was going nowhere, Spencer quietly made his stance clear. Spencer, isn't that a bit too drastic? Let's think this over calmly. I gently urged Spencer to reconsider. I know it sounds drastic, but if this is the only way, Spencer insisted. Startled by the mention of cutting ties, Susan and Isaac hesitated. They requested a brief consultation and moved to a different location. I caught glimpses of them whispering and casting glances our way from the corner of my eye. After a short while, Susan and Isaac returned, sharing a smug smile before presenting their decision. They would allow the marriage and pregnancy, but with conditions. The initial relief of their acceptance was quickly overshadowed by the word conditions, making everyone but Susan and Isaac tense. The stipulation was that Sarah and Spencer must live with Spencer's parents at their home. Additionally, we, Sarah's parents, were to provide Susan and Isaac with living expenses for Sarah. The thought of Sarah, who had never lived on her own, much less with her in-laws, filled me with apprehension. What's the matter? Any complaints? If you can't accept these terms, then we won't approve of the pregnancy or the marriage. And of course, we'll categorically refuse to cut ties with Spencer. What will it be, Sarah? Susan's confrontational tone caused Sarah to look down. Okay, thank you for your approval, Sarah reluctantly agreed after some thought. The anxious look on Sarah's face made me feel a twinge of sadness. Though my worries never fully dissipated, seeing Spencer gently support Sarah, I decided to keep a watchful eye on them for a while. Soon, Sarah and Spencer proceeded to drop out of college to support their upcoming child. Spencer started working at a company owned by a friend of Harold, while Sarah assisted with piecework and household chores under Susan, her future mother-in-law. Harold, who had introduced Spencer to the job despite having no work experience, did his best to help them adjust to their new responsibilities. Initially, I inquired about his progress out of concern. Contrary to Harold's worries, Spencer was well regarded at his workplace. Spencer seems to be doing really well at work. I'm quite proud, Harold spoke with pride, showing how diligently Spencer worked and saved money. Our initial anxiety gradually transformed into a growing sense of reassurance about Sarah and Spencer. Time passed, and Sarah safely gave birth to triplets. When I first heard it was triplets, I was so surprised that I kept asking Sarah if there was a mistake, a memory that still stands vividly in my mind. I don't know anyone in my circle who has had triplets, and I've heard that multiple pregnancies carry higher risks compared to singleton pregnancies. Amidst these concerns, the days were filled with worry about whether they would be born safely, but the triplets were developing well in Sarah's womb. When they were born, they were incredibly adorable, truly becoming the apple of my eye. Nancy was the first to arrive, the only girl among them. Her eyes were big and beautifully double-lidded, a very charming little girl right from the start. Then came Tanner, the smallest at birth, making us hope he would grow strong and healthy. Lastly was Taylor, who consumed the most milk, making Sarah feel he was robust. Sarah and Spencer cherished their children deeply, and we as grandparents frequently visited Isaac's house to dote on them. After giving birth to the triplets, Sarah started working a part-time job. The following year, Spencer, wanting to provide more for his adorable children, and Sarah changed jobs to earn more, working harder than before. Seeing Sarah's family come together joyfully reminded me of Sarah's childhood. I deeply wished for their happiness to last forever. One day, Sarah's family planned to visit our home. Harold was looking forward to playing with our grandchildren. From the morning, I was excited too, with the table laden with their favorite snacks and toys. Soon, the doorbell rang, and there stood Sarah, Spencer, and the triplets. Hello, Grandma and Grandpa. Tanner, who was small at birth, had grown into a lively boy. Taylor ran after Tanner into the living room. Nancy, being the only girl, seemed a bit shy compared to her brothers. Seeing Nancy, Harold crouched to her level, offering his hand. Hello, Nancy. There are some sweets over there. Shall we go together? Comforted by Harold's gentle voice, Nancy took his hand and walked towards the living room. Spencer followed them, and Sarah and I walked behind. Unexpectedly, Sarah stopped. I turned around, wondering why she had paused. Mom, there's something I want to talk about, just the two of you. Seeing her unusually serious face, I felt a slight unease. Okay, shall we talk in your room then? We went to the room Sarah used before moving out. Sarah sat on the bed, and I took a seat on a chair. Then, looking determined, Sarah started to speak. Once the kids turn 5, I'm thinking of moving out from my in-laws' house. What's wrong? Did something happen? I had never heard any complaints or grievances from Sarah, who had lived with her in-laws until now. Sarah began to speak quietly, and after confiding in me, left to join her children. Later, Sarah and Spencer asked us to watch the kids for a few hours as they wanted to look for a new place to live after moving out of the in-laws' house. Of course, take some time for yourselves, I encouraged with a smile and a hand on their children's heads. Sarah and Spencer left the house. It had been quite some time since Sarah's family arrived, so Nancy, who was initially nervous, was now engrossed in the toys we had prepared. Tanner and Taylor were playing together with block toys. I was all set to keep them entertained until Sarah and Spencer returned. How many hours had passed since they left? I was starting to worry when I glanced at the clock, and just then the phone rang. A bad feeling washed over me as I rushed to answer it. It was the police on the line. Yes, that's me. Yes, okay, understood. The police officer's voice seemed so distant as I hung up the phone in shock. Harold, sensing something was wrong, came over and shook my shoulder. What's wrong? You look pale. My voice trembled as I explained that Sarah and Spencer had been in an accident. They were hit by a car while crossing an intersection and had died instantly. How could I possibly explain this to their innocent children, still playing joyfully? The mere thought brought tears to my eyes. Harold and I hurried to the hospital to start the necessary procedures and confirmations. Harold's hand on my shoulder was trembling, making the reality all the more poignant. After confirming Sarah and Spencer's death, we were swamped with arrangements without even a moment to grieve. There were endless visits to the police and municipal offices, funeral arrangements, and notifying relatives. At Sarah and Spencer's funeral, friends and Spencer's colleagues mourned their untimely deaths, highlighting how beloved they were. It struck me how fortunate they were to have such a supportive community. While Harold and I were busy with funeral staff and attendees, Susan and Isaac were surrounded by acquaintances shedding endless tears. Despite our own sadness, we were just trying to stay strong amidst the overwhelming pain. I muttered to myself, heartbroken during the hectic funeral. Susan's promise to raise the triplets well was the only thing that offered me a sliver of comfort, showing her caring heart for them. Even after the funeral ended, the busy days continued without a break, especially with taking care of the grandchildren. Since the day Sarah and Spencer had their accident, the triplets have been living with us. We didn't tell them directly about their parents' passing, just that they wouldn't be seeing them anymore. Even though they're young, they must find it strange not to see their parents return after a whole day. Understanding they won't see their beloved parents again, tears welled up in my eyes. The eldest, Tanner and Taylor, perhaps not fully grasping the situation, looked at crying Nancy with curiosity and gently patted her head. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Shall I bring you some medicine? The boys, especially being protective of Nancy, the only girl, asked her gently. They must feel it's their duty to protect her, even unconsciously. Embracing these kind-hearted three, I too shed tears. Harold and I had never spent a night with these children before. Perhaps out of consideration for their in-laws, Sarah and her family had never stayed over at our house. We were completely unfamiliar with their meal schedules, nap times, or how to put them to bed. Everything was uncharted territory, leaving Harold and me feeling overwhelmed. Tanner and Taylor probably started to sense something was wrong, realizing they couldn't see their beloved parents. They became anxious and started crying. I wanted to stay close to Nancy, who hadn't smiled since the accident, but there were too many urgent tasks to handle. I tried calling Susan and Isaac, hoping they could share some of the burden. Hello. I was hoping to ask for your help with some arrangements. Susan's response over the phone was cold. We're not really knowledgeable about that. You probably handle it more smoothly, right? We had never spent a night with these children before, to be honest. We weren't experts either. We were just trying our best because it needed to be done. However, no matter how much we repeated it, they couldn't help with the various tasks. Could you at least stay with the children until we finish the procedures? They must be missing you, I asked. No, we're quite busy ourselves. Honestly, we don't have the capacity, was their response. But please, I'm sorry, we have to go now. And with that, the call was abruptly ended. Further attempts to ask for their help over the phone were unsuccessful. No good response ever came. Struggling with the grief of losing Sarah and Spencer, Harold and I managed all the arrangements and took care of the grandchildren, truly exhausted. What remained was the discussion about the division of the estate and custody. Susan and Isaac had not shown their faces since they left their belongings at our house. Up until the day of the discussions, I remembered how much they adored their first grandchildren. Now, understating their parents were gone, the once lively boys had become withdrawn. Harold and I couldn't escape our sorrow, continuing to live in a heavy atmosphere, exhausted from all the arrangements. I hoped the discussions would proceed smoothly. On the day of the discussion, Susan and Isaac arrived at our house and were led to the living room. Just going to talk for a bit. Can you play here? I said to Tanner, the eldest, who obediently took Taylor and Nancy to another room. When I first brought up the future of the children, Susan immediately started discussing the estate. Susan argued that since they had taken care of Sarah's family, all the assets should go to them. Holding back my urge to confront her priority over assets rather than the children, I tried to steer the conversation back to the kids. Then, Susan said something unbelievable. The kids are too much trouble. How about putting them in a facility? I doubted my ears. Sarah's children, whom we've lovingly raised, are her precious treasures. Just like Sarah, we hold the belief that these adorable grandchildren are invaluable to us. But it seems Susan and Isaac stood on different ground. Without any sign of remorse, they made shocking statements, escalating my distrust. They pushed all the troubles onto us while demanding the estate simply because they had lived together in the past. Remembering what Sarah confided in me, I clenched my fists in anger. Then I slowly began to speak. Sarah's children will be taken care of by us. We'll discuss the estate later, I said firmly. Despite my tone, Susan and Isaac kept insisting on transferring the estate rights to them, expecting to gain control. Today, their disregard for their grandchildren, who they once adored, turned my anger into dismay and sadness. What was the meaning of their promise at the funeral to raise the triplets well? Their current behavior made it clear that those words were just for show. I wanted to confront them but refrained, weighed down by the grief of losing Sarah and Spencer and the exhaustion from all the procedures. Of course, taking in our grandchildren was not an issue for us. It might take some time to adjust, but we were confident in our love and care for them. As Susan and Isaac continued to talk about the estate, I quietly resolved in my heart. Impatient with the unproductive discussion, they eventually left our house, adamant about not handing over the estate. Years have passed since Sarah and Spencer died, almost 2 decades. I still remember the joy of legally adopting the triplets. Had these precious children remained with Susan and Isaac, I shudder to think how they might have been treated. The thought alone fills me with dread. We subtly informed the triplets about becoming estranged from Susan and Isaac. The fact that they were never taken in or visited by them is something I fear would hurt them, and I've still not managed to express it directly. Throughout my explanation, none of them looked particularly sad, simply acknowledging with a "we understand." Without their parents, they might have felt lonely during school activities or when interacting with mom friends. Struggling with things they couldn't do well, yet all 3 have grown up to be such honest and wonderful children, not letting those challenges affect them. Now, they truly feel like my own children, carrying on Sarah and Spencer's legacy. We were living peaceful days with the triplets when one day, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I was surprised to find Susan and Isaac standing there. "Hello, it's been a while," Isaac greeted as if the years hadn't affected him. "Oh, it's been a long time. What brings you here all of a sudden?" Ignoring my bewildered reaction, Susan and Isaac entered our house as if it was a matter of course. I hurried after them, taking a good look at their backs for the first time in years. Since then, Susan and Isaac had contacted us a few times about the estate, but they had never once come to see the grandchildren. I had pleaded with them to visit the grieving children, even if just briefly, but busy schedules and other excuses always got in the way, and they never accepted. Our communication dwindled over time, and seeing each other now was truly rare. It seems we've both aged quite a bit, perhaps feeling mutual about this. Susan, leaning on a cane, stood with Isaac's support. I ushered them into the guest room and then briefly explained the situation to Taylor, who was in the living room. "I've got another set of grandparents visiting. Could you fetch Nancy and Tanner for greetings? Are they the ones you mentioned were estranged from?" "Yes, that's them. I wonder what they want." Muttering in confusion, Taylor went off to fetch Nancy and Tanner from his room. Shortly after, led by Taylor, Nancy and Tanner joined us in the guest room. Upon seeing the grown triplets, Susan and Isaac immediately showed a gentle smile, grasping Tanner's hand warmly. "You've grown so much." As Susan fondly stroked Tanner's hand, I was stunned, but Susan, undeterred by my reaction, made an unbelievable proposal. "Why don't we live together again, like old times?" This unexpected suggestion left everyone but Susan and Isaac wide-eyed. Why now, after all this time? If they wanted to live together, why did they push the triplets away back then? They weren't there when the kids truly needed someone. They hadn't shown their faces for so long. Overwhelmed with too many unspoken thoughts, I couldn't decide what to say first. Without a word from me or the triplets, Susan pressed on. "You know, my legs have been quite bad lately. Isaac's been supporting me, but we never know what might happen to us, right? It would be reassuring to have you by our side." At first, I thought they wanted to reconnect now that the grandchildren were grown and less of a burden, but it seemed not to be the case. Were they planning to use these children for their own care after abandoning them so heartlessly before? After abandoning their precious grandchildren like that, how dare they speak so opportunistically now? I was beyond exasperated by their unchanged demeanor, speechless but determined not to let these children be exploited yet. Before I could voice my objection, it was Tanner who spoke up. "Who are you? Can you leave if you're going to be a bother?" Tanner, looking annoyed, shook off Susan's grasp. In agreement with Tanner, Nancy and Taylor also looked sternly at Susan and Isaac. Surprised by the unexpected resistance, Susan and Isaac showed their anger. Then Susan pointed at me, accusing, "She's the one who tore you away from us. We wanted to live together, but it wasn't possible because of her." The grandchildren, noticing the lack of sincerity in Susan and Isaac's words, continued to cast cold glances at them. Over time, they had grown significantly, now looking down on Susan and Isaac. Simply by standing, Tanner and Taylor stood protectively in front of Nancy and me. Susan and Isaac, disliking the show of defiance from Tanner and Taylor, clenched their jaws tightly. Then they exclaimed, "They used to be such obedient and good kids before. You've been brainwashed by this too." At that moment, my patience ran out. Suppressing the urge to shout back in anger, I retrieved something from the drawer and presented it to Susan. Sarah confided in me before her passing. This was given to me at that time. Recalling Sarah's pained expression that day, my voice deepened. "It's all written here, how harshly you treated Sarah just before her accident." Sarah had handed me a small diary. It contained dates and entries resembling a journal. Initially, I had only skimmed through its pages. After Sarah and Spencer's death, as life gradually became more manageable, I remembered the diary and read it carefully, page by page. The entries detailed how Susan exploited Sarah's guilt over their shotgun marriage and her student status, treating her poorly. Sarah endured in silence, unable to share her struggles with anyone. As her pregnancy progressed and her appetite increased, Susan complained about the rising food expenses and reduced Sarah's portions behind Sarah and Spencer's backs. Money was taken from their wallets and accounts. The diary detailed various abuses Sarah had suffered at the hands of Susan and Isaac. Some pages were smudged with what seemed like tears, illustrating the depth of Sarah's pain. Every day, Susan and Isaac hesitantly took the diary, read the first page, then immediately closed it, choosing not to read further. Their reaction confirmed the truth of the contents written within. Although I hesitated to speak of the painful circumstances in front of the triplets, the thought of them possibly being exploited by Susan and Isaac compelled me to share the testimony Sarah had entrusted to me. Sarah had confided in me painfully about her struggles, how her heart eroded with each act of forbearance, and her frustration at not being able to get along with Susan. Remembering Sarah's plight, I felt my grip tighten. How much Sarah suffered, those words I had directed at myself, wondering why I hadn't noticed Sarah's struggles until she confided in me. Despite seeing the diary, Susan claimed not to remember any such thing, showing no signs of apology or remorse. Faced with Susan and Isaac's persistent requests to live together again, I sighed deeply, holding back tears of anger at Susan and Isaac, and at myself for not recognizing Sarah's pain. Nancy gently patted my back. The triplets, even at their young age, faintly remembered Susan being harsh towards Sarah. Nancy, especially being a mama's girl, was always by Sarah's side at home. She distinctly remembered Susan's stern behavior towards Sarah. particularly when Spencer wasn't around. The one clear memory she had was that Sarah often looked sad after talking with Susan. Nancy shared her frustration about being unable to do anything as a child living with Susan and Isaac. I was taken aback as they had never spoken of these things until now, perhaps sparing Harold and me any worry. At the same time, I felt a surge of anger, knowing that Susan was harsh towards Sarah even in front of her young children. Nancy stood beside Tanner and Taylor, all with determined looks, stating, "We don't want to live with such people," echoing Tanner's sentiments. Taylor and Nancy showed agreement. Following Tanner, I spoke up, "I cannot hand over these precious children to you." I stated my position clearly, yet despite our insistence, Susan and Isaac kept pushing to live together with the triplets. Their desperation was evident, likely because their situation wasn't going as planned. Their physical strength seemed to be waning, probably affecting their daily lives. I could empathize with Susan and Isaac's feelings to some extent, as I too have felt the effects of aging, and I knew how significant the support of these children can be during tough times. But the idea of exploiting my precious children for convenience was intolerable. The triplets had been calm during our discussions, but eventually, they showed their anger. "When our parents died, you wanted to send us away to an institution because we were too much trouble." They vaguely remembered. That they remembered such a thing pained my heart. Despite their denials, Taylor countered with a reminder of their own words. "I'll return those exact words to you now. Please leave if you can't handle it. Perhaps you should go to an institution." Following Taylor, Tanner repeated those words. Nancy, showing a strong resolve, also stared down Susan and Isaac. These children, once dismissed as a nuisance 17 years ago, were now returning those words to Susan and Isaac as accomplished adults. Their words made me feel the significance of how Harold and I had raised the triplets together. While I felt a sense of clarity, Susan and Isaac's frustration only deepened. It was thought that Tanner and Taylor's words would finally make them give up. But against expectations, Susan and Isaac only showed irritation without any signs of remorse. "Spencer was supposed to take care of us. Now that he's gone, it's only natural you should do it right." "Yeah. And if you can't do that, then give us a monthly allowance. Have you forgotten all the care we provided when you were little?" Far from showing any regret, they made even more unreasonable demands. They even demanded payment for the care they had supposedly provided up to that point. I was truly at a loss for words. The lack of compassion from Susan and Isaac was shocking beyond anything I had anticipated. Frozen in shock, the triplets exchanged looks inside. Tanner, who had become a police officer, was the first to speak. "If you make any more trouble, I'll call the police. As an officer, I can assure a prompt response." Tanner, now a police officer, warned sternly. Nancy, now a lawyer, spoke next, asserting, "If you threaten our beloved family like this again, we will take legal action." Susan and Isaac's faces paled by the second. Taylor, who worked at the city hall, delivered the final blow. "Also, you're behind on your property taxes, aren't you? Seizure proceedings are likely to start soon. Perhaps you have other matters to attend to." Hearing those words, Susan and Isaac exchanged looks, seemingly realizing they had hit a nerve. They left our home with their heads bowed, their earlier momentum gone. I watched the backs of these three who have become so dependable despite the hardships and the absence of their parents. They'd grown into such caring and wonderful adults, moved to tears by their growth. The triplets comforted me with a gentle hand. After that day, Susan and Isaac never stormed our house again, though they continued to cause trouble at their workplaces, leading to repeated police reports. I had thought they had given up after such a heated discussion. Their persistence left me wondering what to do. Time passed, and then Tanner brought news. Susan and Isaac had been arrested. Isaac reportedly attacked a police officer at Tanner's police station when they were about to be reported again. This constituted a serious obstruction of justice, including their past nuisances. Both were arrested. Relieved by this news, I once again thanked the triplets. "Thank you for growing up so admirably. No matter how many times I say it, it never feels enough. It's us who should be thanking you. We're really grateful. Thank you for being there during the hard times. We've grown this much because of you too." They expressed their gratitude to me and Harold. Seeing Sarah's gentle image overlaid on the triplets, I felt profoundly moved. Even months after Susan and Isaac's arrest, the triplets continued to live happily with us, each now with someone special. As they reach the age of considering marriage, the question of who will stay with Harold and me has become a playful contention. ensuring our family enjoys peaceful and harmonious days.
My name is Audrey, and I was born into what you might call a typical middle-class family. My father was an entrepreneur, always busy with his business, while my mother ruled our home with an iron fist. I had an older sister who seemed to be the perfect daughter in my mother's eyes. From a young age, I learned that in our house, what Mom said was law. Whatever Lisa did, I had to do too. Whatever Mom decided, that was final. Dad would sometimes try to intervene, but he was rarely home, and when he was, Mom always found a way to get her way. As I grew older, the control only tightened. Every decision, from what clothes I wore to what friends I could have, seemed to be made for me. Lisa, meanwhile, flourished under Mom's guidance. She was the golden child, always doing exactly what was expected of her. When Lisa was in her final year of high school, she started dating Richard, the son of a local business tycoon. Mom was over the moon. Did you see how he looked at her? Mom gushed after their first dinner together. Mark my words, we'll be planning a wedding before you know it. I rolled my eyes, but kept quiet. I was in my sophomore year, and I'd learned by now that disagreeing with Mom only led to arguments I couldn't win. Sure enough, Lisa and Richard's relationship progressed quickly. By the time I was a senior, they were engaged, and Mom couldn't have been happier. Now, Audrey, she said one evening, her eyes gleaming with a look I'd come to dread, we need to start thinking about your future too. Lisa's done so well for herself, and you're such a pretty girl. I'm sure we can find you a nice young man from a good family. I felt my stomach twist. Mom, I'm not even out of high school yet. Can't I focus on college first? She waved her hand dismissively. College is important, of course, but so is securing your future. You know, Richard has a cousin who's just a few years older than you. He helps run the family business. I think you two would hit it off splendidly. And just like that, my fate was being decided for me. Again. I looked to Dad for help, but he just gave me a weak smile and retreated to his study. I was on my own, as usual. Just as Mom had orchestrated, I found myself on a date with Richard's cousin, James. He was handsome, I'll give him that, but from the moment we met, something felt off. So, Audrey, James said, leaning back in his chair at the upscale restaurant he'd chosen, I hear you're headed to college soon. Any thoughts on what you'll study? I opened my mouth to answer, but he cut me off. Business, right? It's the smart choice. You'll need to understand how things work when you're part of our family. I blinked, taken aback. Actually, I was thinking about. Trust me, he interrupted again. Business is the way to go. I'll talk to the admissions office at my alma mater. They owe me a favor. And that's how it went. James talked, I listened, and any attempt I made to voice my own opinions was swiftly overridden. By the end of the night, I felt suffocated. Despite my reservations, Mom and Lisa were ecstatic. He's perfect for you, Lisa squealed when I got home. Did you see his watch? That alone probably cost more than Dad makes in a month. I forced a smile, not wanting to burst their bubble. But as the weeks went by and James and I continued to date, I felt increasingly uncomfortable. He was always telling me what to do, what to wear, how to act. It was like having another mother, only worse. One evening, after a particularly stifling date where James had planned our next 3 outings without even asking me, I'd had enough. I called him the next day. James, I think we need to talk, I said, my heart pounding. Sure, babe. What's up? His cavalier tone grated on my nerves. I took a deep breath. I don't think this is working out. You're a great guy, but... Whoa, hold on, he cut in. Is this because I ordered for you last night? I told you, I know what's best. You'll learn to appreciate it. No, James. It's not just that. I don't think we're compatible. I want to break up. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. You're making a mistake, Audrey. You won't find better than me. Think about your family, about your future. Don't be stupid. I hung up, my hands shaking. I'd done it. I'd broken free. But my relief was short-lived. The moment Mom found out, all hell broke loose. "What were you thinking?" she screeched. "James is perfect for you. Do you want to end up alone? Do you want to shame this family like that?" I stood my ground, but the pressure was immense. Day after day, Mom and Lisa tag-teamed me, wearing down my resolve. They'd arrange accidental meetings with James, leaving us alone together when he'd stop by to see Mom. The constant barrage was exhausting. Each day, I felt my resolve weakening. Finally, worn down by the relentless pressure, I gave up. "Fine," I told Mom, my voice hollow. "I'll give James another chance." The look of triumph on her face made my stomach turn, but I was too tired to fight anymore. I began to accept James's courtship again, going through the motions of the relationship they all wanted from me. Mom and Lisa were overjoyed. In the evenings, I'd overhear them excitedly planning for the future, discussing how they would manage the brothers' company once James and I were married. They dreamed aloud about all the money and the entire business that would become available to them. As if controlling my love life wasn't enough, Lisa took it upon herself to plan my entire career. One evening, she burst into my room, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Audrey, I've got it all figured out," she exclaimed. "There's a perfect position for you in Richard and James' company. You'll be the head of PR. That's why you're going to Hillside Business College. I've already picked out your classes." My protests fell on deaf ears. Before I knew it, I was enrolled in Hillside, studying subjects I had zero interest in. Each day was a struggle, and I felt my spirit dying a little more with every class. After a particularly grueling week, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Dad, telling him everything. To my surprise and relief, he listened. "Audrey," he said finally, "this is your life. If you're not happy, then it's time for a change. I'll support you, whatever you decide." With Dad's blessing and financial support, I made my escape. I applied to a college in another city, one that offered programs I was genuinely interested in. When I got accepted, I packed my bags and left without looking back. Once I was settled in my new city, I knew there was one more thing I had to do. With trembling hands, I wrote a message to James. "James, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I don't love you, and I don't want to see you again. Please respect my decision." I hit send, hoping he'd understand. His reply came quickly, and my heart sank as I read it. "Audrey, you're not thinking straight. I'm going to talk to your mother and Lisa. They'll knock some sense into you. You're not going anywhere, babe. We're meant to be together." I felt sick. Even miles away, they were trying to control me. Months passed, and I thrived in my new environment. I made friends, excelled in my classes, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself. Then, at a graduation party for a friend, I met him. Tom, the brother of one of the graduates. He was kind, funny, and most importantly, he listened when I spoke. We started dating, and I fell hard. This wasn't the manufactured affection I'd felt for James. This was real, all-consuming love. When Tom proposed a year later, I didn't hesitate to say yes. With shaking hands, I dialed my parents' number. "Mom, Dad," I said when they picked up, "I'm coming home for a visit. And, I'm bringing my fiancé." The silence on the other end was deafening. When we arrived at my parents' house, Dad greeted us warmly, genuine happiness shining in his eyes. Mom and Lisa, however, were cold and aloof. At dinner, the interrogation began. "So, Tom," Mom said, her voice sickly sweet, "what position do you hold in your company?" Tom looked confused. "Oh, I'm just starting out. Entry-level marketing associate." I saw the disappointment flash in Mom's eyes. Lisa jumped in. "And what about your family's business?" "We don't have a family business," Tom replied honestly. "My parents are teachers." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mom's smile became forced. Audrey, dear, can I speak to you in the kitchen? In the kitchen, Mom's facade cracked. Are you insane? She hissed. You had James, a successful, wealthy man who could provide for you. And you choose this? Before I could respond, the front door opened. To my horror, James walked in, as if he owned the place. He strode over to me, throwing an arm around my shoulders. Hey babe, miss me? Tom stood up, his face flushed with anger. He ordered James to get away from me. Mom turned to him, her voice ice cold. You arrogant, ill-mannered boy. How dare you come into our home and try to steal our daughter? Get out, now. I'd had enough. I shrugged off James' arm and took Tom's hand. We're leaving, I announced, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. As we walked out, I could hear Mom, Lisa, and James shouting after us. But for once, I didn't care. I was choosing my own path, with someone who truly loved me for who I was. Despite the drama with my family, Tom and I went ahead with our wedding plans. The day finally arrived, and it was beautiful, almost perfect. The only shadow on our happiness was the conspicuous absence of my mother and sister. During the reception, I couldn't escape the concerned looks and whispered questions from relatives. I could see the confusion and concern on the faces of Tom's family. How could I explain that my own mother and sister had chosen not to come because they disapproved of the man I loved? After the wedding, Tom and I settled into his apartment, ready to start our new life together. For the most part, things were wonderful. We were happy, in love, and excited about our future. But there was one recurring nightmare: family holidays at my parents' house. The first Thanksgiving after our wedding, we decided to attend, hoping for reconciliation. Big mistake. As we walked in, I froze. There, sitting at the dining table like he belonged, was James. Audrey, Mom exclaimed, her voice sickly sweet. Look who decided to join us. Isn't it nice of James to come? I saw Tom's jaw clench, but he remained silent. As we were cleaning up, James cornered me in the kitchen. Hey, Audrey, he said, leaning in close. Can we talk privately, for old time's sake? Before I could respond, Tom appeared, his face thunderous. He grabbed James by the shirt, pushing him back. Stay away from my wife, he growled. Mom burst in, her face red with anger. How dare you, she shrieked at Tom. Get out of my house, you brute. We left, and I thought that would be the end of it. But every holiday, every family gathering, the same scene played out. James would be there, Mom would fawn over him, and Tom and I would leave feeling hurt and angry. The final straw came when I saw the social media posts. Mom and Lisa had shared childhood photos of me, pictures of James and me together, all with captions about how I had abandoned the family, how Tom was tearing the family apart. That night, I sat down at my computer and began to type. I poured out everything: the years of manipulation, the pressure to be with James, the constant undermining of my choices. I described how they had tried to control every aspect of my life, from my career to my love life. I explained why Tom and I had stopped coming to family events, detailing the uncomfortable situations we'd been put in. The response was overwhelming. Comments flooded in from relatives and friends, many expressing shock at what I'd been through and offering support. The tide of family opinion had turned. Where once there had been judgment, now there was understanding. Where there had been sympathy for Mom and Lisa, now there was criticism of their controlling behavior. After my big post online, I stopped talking to my mom and sister. I did talk to my dad, though, and he was really supportive. This made my mom really angry. She yelled at Dad, trying to get him to make me divorce Tom and marry James instead. Dad had always done what Mom wanted, but this time was different. He'd had enough. He shouted back at her and even gave her divorce papers. They split up, and Dad let Mom keep the house so he wouldn't have to pay her money every month. He moved out with just one suitcase. He had some savings, so he rented a place near me and Tom. Mom and Lisa, predictably, didn't take this well. Their social media accounts exploded with posts accusing me of turning dad against mom, of destroying our family. The psychological pressure was relentless. Unable to bear it any longer, I blocked their accounts and made my own profiles private. As I clicked the confirm button, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. At first, I thought it was just stress, but as the feeling persisted, a different possibility crossed my mind. A quick trip to the pharmacy and an anxious wait later, my suspicion was confirmed: I was pregnant. Joy and fear warred within me. Would this news finally make Mom and Lisa back off? My hope was short-lived. Somehow, Mom found out about my pregnancy, probably through one of the relatives I hadn't blocked. But instead of reaching out with congratulations or reconciliation, she started a vicious rumor campaign. "Did you hear?" my cousin texted me. "Your mom is telling everyone the baby is James's. She says you've been sneaking around behind Tom's back." I stared at the message in disbelief, my hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. How could she stoop so low? The stress was becoming unbearable. Tom found me crying on the couch that evening. Without a word, he wrapped me in his arms, letting me sob into his shirt. When I finally calmed down, he gently lifted my chin, his eyes full of love and concern. "This has to stop," he said softly. "You need a break from all this drama. How about a vacation? Just you, somewhere peaceful, to relax and focus on yourself and our baby." The idea was tempting, but I hesitated. "I can't just leave you to deal with all this." He smiled, shaking his head. "I'll be fine. You and the little one are my priority. Let me take care of you." Before I knew it, Tom had booked me a week-long stay at a serene country resort. As I packed my bags, I felt a glimmer of hope. A week away from all the chaos, a chance to breathe and center myself, it sounded like heaven. For the first few days of my vacation, I finally found the peace I'd been craving. The country resort was beautiful, with its lush forests and serene lakes. I spent my time reading, taking gentle walks, and just breathing in the fresh air. It felt like I could finally relax. But on the third day, my tranquility was shattered. As I walked into the resort's dining area, I froze. There, at a nearby table, were Lisa, her husband Richard, and James. My heart sank. This couldn't be a coincidence. Lisa spotted me and waved enthusiastically, as if we were the best of friends. "Audrey, what a surprise. Come join us." I shook my head. "Please, just leave me alone. I'm here to rest." But Lisa wouldn't take no for an answer. For the next 2 days, she kept showing up wherever I went. She'd sit at my table with Richard and James, chatting and laughing as if everything was normal. She was constantly taking selfies of the four of us, posting them online with captions like "family reunion" and "so great to reconnect." I felt sick. I knew what she was doing, trying to create a false narrative, to make it look like I was happily spending time with James. She wanted to cause problems between me and Tom. I texted my husband about what's going on here. By the 5th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to cut my trip short and go home. As I was leaving my room with my suitcase, Lisa appeared at the top of the stairs. "Audrey, wait," she called out. "You can't leave. James is ready to forgive you. He says he'll even adopt your baby. He still wants to marry you." I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my pregnancy. "I'm not feeling well, Lisa. Please, just leave me alone." I turned to go down the stairs, but Lisa grabbed my arm. "You're such a fool," she hissed. "Can't you see what's best for you?" "Let go of me," I shouted, trying to pull away. She released my arm, but the sudden movement threw me off balance. I felt myself falling, tumbling down the stairs. The world spun around me, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was at the bottom of the stairs. Tom was leaning over me, his face pale with worry. How had he gotten here? The pain in my abdomen was excruciating. The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and doctors' concerned faces. Despite their best efforts, it was too late. I had lost the baby. As I lay in the hospital bed, Tom holding my hand, the full weight of what had happened crashed over me. The vacation that was supposed to be my escape had turned into a nightmare. My sister's relentless pursuit of her own agenda had cost me my child. In the aftermath of the tragedy, my grief turned to rage. The loss of my child was not just a terrible accident, it was the result of Lisa's reckless and manipulative behavior. With Tom's support, I decided to take legal action against my sister. The court case was grueling, but justice was on my side. Several resort guests had witnessed Lisa's confrontation with me on the stairs. Their testimonies, along with security camera footage, provided irrefutable evidence of her dangerous actions. The judge ruled in my favor, awarding me $10,000 in compensation. When news of the lawsuit reached my mother, her reaction was swift and harsh. She called me, her voice cold and cutting. "You've gone too far this time, Audrey," she spat. "Suing your own sister? You're no longer my daughter." The line went dead, and with it, the last thread connecting me to my mother snapped. Despite the finality of it, I felt a strange sense of relief. Tom and I decided it was time for a fresh start. We sold our apartment and bought a new house with a mortgage. We were careful to keep our new address a secret from my mother and sister. Only Dad knew where we lived now, and he promised to keep it to himself. The move was just the beginning of our healing process. I started seeing a psychologist, working through the trauma of losing our child and the years of family manipulation. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. As months passed, our life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Then, one morning, I discovered I was pregnant again. Joy mingled with fear as I shared the news with Tom. "We'll keep it between us for now," he said, holding me close. "No one else needs to know until you're ready." We guarded our secret carefully, telling no one, not even my dad. I was extra cautious, following every bit of advice from my doctor. As my belly grew, we finally shared the news with Dad, swearing him to secrecy. The pregnancy progressed without complications, each week bringing a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Finally, after what felt like the longest 9 months of my life, our daughter was born, a healthy, beautiful baby girl. Life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Our daughter, Lily, was now 6 months old, filling our days with joy and laughter. Tom and I had found our groove as parents, and with each passing day, the pain of our past faded a little more. One afternoon, as I was putting Lily down for her nap, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer it. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Audrey, it's your mother." I nearly dropped the phone in shock. Before I could respond, she continued, her voice uncharacteristically meek. "Your sister is here too. We need your help." As they explained their situation, I felt a mix of emotions, pity, anger, and a strange sense of vindication. Lisa's husband had gone bankrupt, and she had left him. They were in dire financial straits. "We need you to talk to your father," Mom said. "Convince him to help us out. And, we need you to return the compensation money from the lawsuit." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. Dad makes his own decisions, and that money was awarded by the court. Please don't contact me again." Just then, Lily started crying in the next room. Mom's voice sharpened. "Is that a baby? Audrey, do you have a child?" I closed my eyes, cursing the timing. "Yes, I have a daughter." "A granddaughter?" Mom's voice rose. "How dare you keep this from me? I demand to see her." "You can't keep my grandchild from me." Her shouting woke Lily fully, and her cries grew louder. I felt my own anger rising. "You lost any right to be in my child's life when you disowned me," I said, my voice cold. "If you or Lisa try to contact us again, I'll file for a restraining order. Goodbye." I hung up and immediately blocked the number, my hands shaking. Tom came in, carrying a fussing Lily. "Who was that?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "My mother and sister," I said, taking Lily into my arms. They're having money troubles and wanted help. I said no. Tom nodded, pulling us both into a hug. You did the right thing, he said softly. Later that week, I called Dad to warn him about Mom and Lisa's situation. He sighed heavily. I know, sweetheart. They tried to contact me too, he said. I've heard through the grapevine that they've been evicted from their home. They're living in a pretty rough area now. I felt a twinge of sadness, quickly replaced by resolve. They made their choices, Dad. We can't let them drag us back into their drama. You're right, he agreed. How's my little princess doing? As I updated him on Lily's latest milestones, I felt a wave of gratitude. Despite everything, I had this, a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, and a father who stood by me. We had built a life filled with love and respect, far from the manipulation and drama of my past. My name's Amelia, and I've got a story to tell you. I grew up in what you'd call an ordinary family, Mom, Dad, and a little sister named Lily. Sounds nice, right? Well, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Lily was difficult, to put it mildly. She was the kind of kid who'd scream bloody murder if she didn't get her way. And boy, did she know how to work our parents. They'd bend over backwards just to keep her from throwing one of her famous tantrums. Amelia, honey, my mom would say, her voice strained, could you please let Lily have the last cookie? You know how she gets. And I'd nod, because what else could I do? I was the good girl, the one who didn't make waves. I learned early on that it was easier to fade into the background than to compete with Hurricane Lily. As we grew older, the pattern stayed the same. Lily demanded, our parents caved, and I just tried to stay out of the way. I buried myself in books and schoolwork, dreaming of the day I could leave it all behind. That day finally came when I got accepted to college on a full-ride scholarship. As I packed my bags, I felt a mix of excitement and guilt. Excitement for the new life waiting for me, and guilt for leaving my parents to deal with Lily alone. But I pushed that guilt down deep. It was time for me to live my own life. The next morning, as I loaded my beat-up old car with everything I owned, my mom hugged me tight. We're so proud of you, Amelia, she whispered. You're going to do great things. Dad clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes suspiciously bright. Remember, you can always come home if you need to. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Lily watched from the porch, arms crossed, not saying a word. College was like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to tiptoe around anyone's feelings or give up what I wanted. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of this opportunity. Meanwhile, life back home continued as usual. Lily, predictably, didn't move out. Instead, she married her high school sweetheart, Tom, right after graduation. And where did they decide to live? With our parents, of course. I'd get calls from Mom every now and then, her voice tired but trying to sound upbeat. Lily and Tom are still settling in, she'd say. It's nice having the grandkids around. But I could read between the lines. Lily was using our parents as free childcare and housekeeping. She'd pop out 2 kids in quick succession, all while never holding down a job. Tom worked, sure, but from what I gathered, he wasn't exactly bringing home the big bucks. One day, during a rare visit home, I overheard Lily talking to Mom in the kitchen. Mom, can you watch the kids tonight? Tom and I want to go out. Lily, honey, your father and I had plans. Oh, come on. It's not like you have anything important to do. We never get a night off. I peeked around the corner to see Mom's shoulders slump in defeat. All right, dear. We'll watch them. It made my blood boil, but what could I say? I was the one who'd left, after all. So I bit my tongue and focused on my own life. After graduation, I landed a job at an international company as a manager. It wasn't easy. I worked long hours, took on extra projects, did whatever it took to get ahead. But it paid off. Within a few years, I was head of my department. While Lily was demanding our parents buy her groceries, I was saving every penny I could. It wasn't glamorous, no fancy clothes or wild nights out for me. But slowly, surely, I built up my savings. First came the apartment. Nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom, but it was mine. I remember the day I got the keys, standing in the empty living room, hardly able to believe it was real. Then the car. Again, nothing flashy, but reliable and paid for in full. All the while, I kept my head down and worked hard. I didn't have much of a social life, but that was okay. I was building something for myself, something no one could take away. Dating? It wasn't really on my radar. I went out occasionally, but nothing serious. That is, until I met Jake. Jake was different from the start. He didn't try to impress me with fancy restaurants or smooth talk. Instead, he challenged me, made me laugh, and most importantly, he respected my drive. "You're something else, Amelia," he said on our third date, shaking his head in admiration. "Most people would be burned out, working as hard as you do. But you're thriving." I shrugged, a little uncomfortable with the praise. "I just know what I want, that's all." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Well, I know what I want too. And it's you, Amelia." For the first time in years, I felt my carefully constructed walls start to crumble. Maybe, just maybe, there was room in my life for more than just work and saving money. Jake and I dated for a few years before he finally popped the question. I'll be honest, I was hesitant at first. Marriage wasn't something I'd given much thought to, always focused on my career and financial stability. But Jake, he had a way of making me see beyond my self-imposed limitations. The day of the wedding arrived, and despite my reservations, I was excited. This was my day, after all. I was marrying the man I loved. Then Lily showed up. My sister waltzed into the bridal suite wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal. "Oh, Amelia," she exclaimed, twirling around. "Don't you love my dress? I wanted to look my best for your big day." I stared at her, speechless. Was she seriously trying to upstage me at my own wedding? "Lily," I finally managed, "don't you think that dress is a bit inappropriate for a bridesmaid?" She pouted, looking around at our cousins who were helping me get ready. "What do you mean? I think I look great." "Don't I look great, girls?" Our cousins, not wanting to cause a scene, mumbled awkward agreements. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was my day. I wasn't going to let Lily's antics ruin it. "It's fine," I said, turning back to the mirror. "Let's just get this show on the road." The ceremony itself was beautiful. Jake's eyes lit up when he saw me walking down the aisle, and in that moment, all the stress and family drama faded away. This was about us, about our love and our future together. But at the reception, things got interesting. More than once, I overheard guests asking Lily if she was the bride. She'd giggle and say, "Oh no, that's my sister. But doesn't this dress look amazing on me?" Jake, bless him, did his best to keep me calm. "Don't let it get to you," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "Everyone knows you're the star of this show." And he was right. Despite Lily's best efforts, the day was still ours. We danced, we laughed, we celebrated with our friends and family. And at the end of the night, as Jake and I drove off to start our honeymoon, I felt a sense of peace. After the wedding, Jake and I settled into a rhythm. We moved into his apartment, which was bigger and in a nicer area than mine. I decided to keep my old place and rent it out, just another investment for the future, I thought. I threw myself back into work with renewed energy. Jake was supportive, always there with a cup of coffee when I was burning the midnight oil or a shoulder to lean on when deals fell through. But it wasn't just about work anymore. I started looking into investments, particularly securities. It was a whole new world, full of risks and potential rewards. And payoff it did. 5 years flew by, and suddenly we found ourselves sitting on a decent nest egg. That's when I had an idea. Let's buy a vacation home, I suggested to Jake one evening. Somewhere my parents could use too, to get away from everything. Jake knew what I meant by everything. My sister, her husband, their 3 kids, it was a lot for my parents to handle. We found the perfect place, a beautiful villa on a lake, just outside the city. It had everything, a large barbecue area, a sprawling terrace, 3 bedrooms, and a view that took your breath away. The moment I saw it, I knew it was the one. The day we closed the deal, I called my parents. "Mom, Dad, I've got a surprise for you," I said, barely containing my excitement. When they arrived at the villa, my mom's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Amelia," she whispered, looking around in awe. This is too much." Dad was speechless, running his hand along the smooth kitchen countertop like he couldn't believe it was real. "It's not too much," I insisted. "You deserve this. A place to relax, to get away from your sister," Dad finished, a hint of guilt in his voice. I nodded. "But listen, there's one thing. Can we not tell Lily that I bought this? Can we say it's yours? That you bought it with your savings?" Mom looked confused. "But why?" I sighed, thinking about the phone call I'd had with Lily just the day before. She'd asked to borrow money for a car, and I'd said no. I could only imagine how she'd react if she found out about this place. "It's just easier this way," I said. "Please?" They agreed, albeit reluctantly. Little did I know the storm this white lie would stir up. A few days later, I got a call from Mom. She sounded exhausted. "Lily found out about the villa," she said. She wants us to sell it. Says we should give her the money instead, so she can buy a sports car and travel the world." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "And what did you say?" "We said no, of course. But Amelia, it was bad." She screamed, she cried. "Said we loved you more, that we always favored you." I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar mixture of guilt and frustration. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I never meant to cause trouble." "It's not your fault, sweetie," Mom said, but I could hear the weariness in her voice. "Your father and we've decided to move to the villa. Full-time. We can't do this anymore." As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. My parents were finally standing up for themselves, finally taking a step back from Lily's chaos. But at the same time, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I knew this wasn't the end of it. Lily wouldn't let this go without a fight. It was a sunny Saturday when Jake and I decided to surprise my parents with a visit to the villa. But as we got closer, something felt off. The sound of loud music filled the air, and I could see cars parked haphazardly on the lawn. We pulled up to the villa, and the scene that greeted us was chaos. People were everywhere, drinking, laughing, kids running around screaming. And right in the middle of it all was Lily, holding court like she owned the place. When she saw us, her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" I looked around, trying to spot my parents. "Where's Mom and Dad?" Lily waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Mom's out walking with the kids. Dad's gone to get more meat for the barbecue." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You sent them out? While you're having a party?" "It's a celebration," Lily exclaimed. "We're christening the new family vacation home. Not that you'd understand, Miss Workaholic." I felt my blood begin to boil. "Lily, this isn't..." She cut me off. "Look, Amelia, why don't you and Jake just leave? Your sour face is going to ruin everyone's mood." I stood there, speechless. Jake put his hand on my arm. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go." As we drove away, I couldn't shake the image of Lily lording over my villa, the villa I'd bought for our parents. "I can't believe her," I fumed. "Using Mom and Dad like that, treating the place like it's hers." Jake sighed. "Maybe it's just a one-time thing?" But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I heard from Mom about the constant stream of parties and get-togethers Lily was hosting at the villa. And when she wasn't partying, she was dumping her kids on our parents. The kids are missing school, Mom confided in me during one of our calls. She sounded exhausted. Lily says it's not a big deal for Tommy, he's only 4. But Emily and Jack are falling behind. By the way, I forgot to mention that Lily gave birth to her 3rd child shortly after my wedding. I'd had enough. The next time I saw Lily, I confronted her. You need to stop taking advantage of Mom and Dad, I said. They're not your personal babysitters. And the kids need to be in school. Lily rolled her eyes. Don't be such a killjoy, Amelia. Mom and Dad love having the kids around. But I could see the toll it was taking on our parents. They looked tired, worn down. This wasn't the peaceful retirement I'd envisioned for them when I bought the villa. After several more failed attempts to reason with Lily, I made a difficult decision. I contacted Child Protective Services. The investigation was quick and discreet. Lily got a formal reprimand, and suddenly, the kids were back in school full-time. The endless parties at the villa stopped too. Mom called me a few days later. Things have calmed down, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Your father and I are actually getting to enjoy the place now. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was what I'd wanted all along, for my parents to have a peaceful place to retire. But my relief was short-lived. The next time I saw Lily, her eyes were full of venom. I know what you did, she spat. Calling CPS on your own sister. You're a traitor, Amelia. I'll never forgive you for this. A few months passed quickly. It was my mom's birthday, and Jake and I decided to surprise her with a weekend visit to the villa. We had visions of a quiet family celebration, maybe a nice dinner on the terrace overlooking the lake. But as we pulled up to the house, those dreams quickly evaporated. The place was in chaos. Music blared from speakers, people were everywhere, and kids were running wild across the lawn. It looked like Lily had invited half the town. We made our way inside, where I found Mom in the kitchen, looking exhausted and on the verge of tears. Happy birthday, Mom, I said, giving her a hug. She clung to me a little too tightly. Oh, Amelia, she whispered. I just wanted a quiet day with family. But Lily, she invited all these people. Your father and I have been running around all day, serving drinks, cooking food. I stepped out onto the lawn, searching for Lily in the crowd. When I spotted her, laughing with a group of friends, I marched over. Lily, we need to talk, I said firmly. This is Mom's birthday. She wanted a family day, not this. I gestured at the chaos around us. Lily laughed loudly. Oh, lighten up. Mom loves having people over. Stop being such a buzzkill. Frustrated, I walked over to a group of guests near the speakers. Excuse me, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the music. Could you please turn this down? It's too loud. The guests, clearly drunk, just laughed and turned the volume up higher. As I stood there, trying to figure out what to do next, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Lily was huddled with a group of kids, pointing in my direction and giggling. With horror, I realized she was handing them ice cream cones and encouraging them to throw them at me. Before I could react, the first scoop of ice cream flew past my head. I ducked, and it hit a woman behind me square in the face. Chaos erupted. More ice cream was flying, kids were screaming, and adults were yelling. Lily's voice rose above the commotion. Look what you've done, Amelia. You're ruining everything, as usual. The crowd, fueled by alcohol and Lily's accusations, started to turn ugly. Men and women were shouting, moving towards Jake and me with clenched fists. I felt Jake's hand on my arm. Amelia, we need to get out of here, he said urgently. But I'd had enough. This was my parents' home, the home I'd bought for them. This had to stop. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I'm calling the police, I announced loudly. The police arrived quickly, lights flashing. As it turned out, they'd already received noise complaints from the neighbors. "Who owns this property?" one of the officers asked. I stepped forward. "I do. I'm Amelia Johnson. My parents live here, but these people," I gestured to the crowd, "are here without my invitation." The officers nodded and quickly got to work, ushering the drunk guests off the property and warning them about the consequences of starting a fight. As the police cars drove away with the last of the uninvited guests, an eerie silence fell over the villa. The aftermath of the chaotic party was strewn all around: empty bottles, discarded plates, and the lingering tension in the air. Lily stood in the middle of the living room, her face a mix of shock and anger. "What do you mean, this is your house?" she demanded, her voice shrill. I took a deep breath. "I bought it. For Mom and Dad to retire in peace." "You?" Lily's eyes narrowed. Then, suddenly, her demeanor changed. A sly smile spread across her face. Well, little Miss Perfect. Always full of surprises." She sauntered over to me, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, Amelia. Let's forget about this little misunderstanding. I've got a proposition for you." I raised an eyebrow, wary. "What are you talking about?" "This property," Lily gestured around grandly. "It's got potential. Why don't you sign it over to me? I could build a few more houses, rent them out. I've been looking for a passive income opportunity for ages. You've already got your fancy job. Why not help your sister out?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "This house is for Mom and Dad. It's not for sale or development." Lily's face darkened. "You'll regret this, Amelia. Mark my words." With that, she stormed out, her husband and kids trailing behind her. I turned to Mom, who looked shell-shocked. "I'm so sorry, Mom. This isn't how your birthday was supposed to go." To my surprise, she pulled me into a hug. "Oh, honey. Thank you for standing up for us. For everything." I spent the rest of the day helping Mom clean up the mess, but Lily's threat kept echoing in my mind. I knew my sister well enough to know she wouldn't let this go easily. Before Jake and I left, I made a decision. I hired a security company to install hidden cameras around the property and set up an alarm system that would alert my phone if anyone entered the grounds. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with an alert from the villa's security system. Someone had entered the property. Worried it might be a false alarm triggered by my parents, I called Mom. "Mom, are you and Dad at the villa?" There was a pause. "No, honey. We're back at the old house. Lily, she insisted we come help with the kids. We'd been here for a week." My heart sank. I told Mom I'd call her back and immediately headed for the villa with Jake. The sight that greeted us was heartbreaking. The beautiful home I'd bought for my parents was in shambles. Furniture was overturned, things were strewn everywhere, and there was even some graffiti on the walls. Fury rose in me as I called the police. When they arrived, I showed them the security footage. There was no doubt, it was Lily and her husband, vandalizing the property in a drunken rage. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Lily. "You need to drop the charges," she said without preamble. "The police brought us in for questioning. They're talking about pressing charges for vandalism and trespassing. You have to make this go away, Amelia." I took a deep breath. "No, Lily. I'm done cleaning up your messes. I'm done being the family peacekeeper at the expense of my own peace. From now on, you can talk to my lawyer." The weeks following the villa incident were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and family drama. I was determined to see this through, to finally put an end to Lily's destructive behavior. I had the villa professionally cleaned and repaired, carefully documenting every bit of damage. The bill came to just over $10,000. My lawyer advised me to sue for the full amount, and after some soul-searching, I agreed. The day of the court hearing arrived. I sat on one side of the courtroom, Lily and her husband on the other. She wouldn't even look at me. The judge listened to both sides, reviewed the evidence, including the security camera footage. In the end, his decision was clear. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, he announced. The defendants are ordered to pay $10,000 in damages. But that wasn't all. Due to the nature of the crime and the clear evidence, the judge also handed down a suspended sentence for trespassing and property damage. The aftermath of the trial hit Lily and her family hard. Her husband, who'd always coasted by on charm and family connections, suddenly found himself struggling to find work. No one wanted to hire someone with a criminal record, even if it was suspended. Lily, who'd never worked a day in her life, was forced to find a job. I heard through the grapevine that she was waiting tables at a local diner, coming home exhausted every night. As for me, I made the difficult decision to cut ties completely. I issued a legal notice, barring Lily from the villa, and ceased all communication with her. It was painful, but necessary. Mom and Dad, finally free from Lily's constant demands, moved into the villa full-time. The change in them was remarkable. They looked years younger, more relaxed than I'd seen them in decades. "We should have done this years ago," Dad told me during one of my monthly visits. "We love having the grandkids over, but now it's on our terms. A few hours at a time, and then back to our peaceful life." They'd left their old house to Lily, a final act of parental kindness, but made it clear that the financial support stopped there. It was time for Lily to stand on her own 2 feet. As for me, life was looking up. Work was going well, my relationship with Jake was stronger than ever, and then we got some unexpected news. "I'm pregnant," I told Jake one evening, my voice shaking with excitement and nervousness. His face lit up like a Christmas tree. He picked me up and spun me around, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. As I write this, I'm 6 months along. We're having a little girl. Jake and I are busy preparing the nursery, reading every parenting book we can get our hands on. I still think about Lily sometimes. Last I heard, she and her husband were fighting constantly, teetering on the edge of divorce. Part of me feels sad for her, for the mess she's made of her life. But a bigger part of me feels free. Free from the obligation to always fix her problems, to be the peacekeeper at the expense of my own happiness. My name's Elizabeth, and I just turned 17 when my life took a wild turn. Let me paint you a picture of my family. On the surface, we seemed decent enough. Dad worked his ass off, and Mom stayed home. I had a little sister, Amy, who was 12 years younger than me. Dad was a big shop manager at this company that belonged to my maternal grandmother. Grandma was a real go-getter. She started with a chain of laundromats, then expanded into making household chemicals and detergents for laundries. When she decided to retire, she offered the business to Mom. But she wasn't interested. So Dad stepped up and took over the company. That's when things started to get complicated. I remember the day it all went to shit. I was in my room, trying to focus on homework, when I heard Mom screaming at Dad downstairs. "You're nothing but a loser, John. This is my house, my family's business. You should be grateful I even let you run it." Things got worse over the next few weeks. Mom and Dad barely spoke to each other, and when they did, it usually ended in a shouting match. I tried to keep Amy distracted, but even at 5, she knew something was wrong. Then came the day that changed everything. I came home from school to find Dad in the living room, a suitcase at his feet. "Dad?" My voice cracked. "What's going on?" He walked over to me, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I can't stay here anymore. It's not good for anyone." I felt like I couldn't breathe. But what about Amy? What about me? Dad pulled back, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. "I love you both so much. Never forget that. But sometimes love isn't enough." He kissed my forehead, then walked over to Amy, who was watching us with wide, confused eyes. He knelt down, hugging her tightly. "Be good for your big sister, okay, pumpkin?" And just like that, he was gone. The door closed behind him with a finality that left me feeling hollow. Mom came home an hour later. When I told her Dad had left, she didn't seem surprised. She just nodded, like she'd been expecting it. "Good riddance," she muttered. "Mom, I couldn't believe what I was hearing." "How can you say that?" She turned to me, her eyes hard. "Your father cheated on me, Elizabeth. Multiple times. I couldn't take it anymore." That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear Mom on the phone in her room. She was laughing, sounding happier than I'd heard her in months. I wondered who she was talking to, but I was too exhausted to care. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated after Dad left, Mom dropped another bombshell on us. "Girls," she announced one morning over breakfast, "I have some news. I'm getting married." I nearly choked on my cereal. "What? Mom, Dad's only been gone for 2 months." She waved her hand dismissively. "Sometimes, true love comes unexpectedly, Elizabeth. You'll understand when you're older." Robert moved in a week later. He was, okay, I guess. Tall, good-looking in that generic way that makes people say, "Oh, he seems nice." But something about him rubbed me the wrong way from the start. He made an effort with Amy, playing games with her and helping her with her homework. But with me? It was like I barely existed. Meanwhile, changes were happening at the company too. Mom had taken over after Dad left, and she brought Robert in to work with her. They seemed to make a good team, always huddled together, discussing business strategies. I tried to focus on my own life, school, friends, the usual teenage stuff. But it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling that I was becoming invisible in my own family. Things came to a head when Mom and Robert announced they were opening a new branch of the company in another city. "We're moving," Mom told me one evening. "It's a great opportunity for the business. As for you, Robert and I have been talking, and we think it might be best if you stay here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Stay here? Without you?" "It's just that the new house won't have much space," she explained hurriedly. "And you're almost done with school. It wouldn't make sense to transfer now, right before your exams." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "So where am I supposed to live? On the street?" "Don't be dramatic, Elizabeth," Mom scolded. "You'll stay with your grandmother. She's already agreed to it." I stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me. As I lay on my bed, hot tears of anger and hurt streaming down my face, I couldn't help but wonder, when did I become such an inconvenience to my own mother? The next few weeks were a blur of packing boxes and tearful goodbyes, not from me, but from Amy, who didn't want to leave her friends. I helped her pack, trying to put on a brave face for her sake. "Will you come visit us, Lizzie?" she asked, her big brown eyes full of tears. I hugged her tightly. "Of course I will, squirt. You can't get rid of me that easily." The day they left, I stood on the porch with Grandma, watching as the moving van pulled away. Mom gave me a quick hug, Robert nodded awkwardly, and then they were gone, taking Amy with them. Living with Grandma wasn't as bad as I'd feared. She was cool in her own way, giving me space when I needed it, but always there with a cup of tea and a listening ear when I wanted to talk. Still, it wasn't home. My 18th birthday rolled around faster than I expected. I woke up that morning feeling weird. Like I should be excited, but all I felt was empty. Mom called, of course. "Happy birthday, sweetie." Her voice was bright, almost too cheery. "I'm sorry we can't be there. Work's just crazy right now. We'll celebrate when we visit next month, okay?" I knew we wouldn't. They hadn't visited once since they left. "Sure, Mom. Sounds great." Grandma must have sensed my mood, because she went all out. She let me invite a few friends over, ordered my favorite food, even baked a cake herself. For a few hours, I almost forgot about everything else. The next morning, Grandma called me into her home office. She had the serious look on her face that made my stomach clench. "Sit down, Elizabeth," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "We need to talk." Oh God, I thought. She's kicking me out. Where am I gonna go? But then she smiled, reached into her desk drawer, and pulled out a small folder. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Open it." I did, and nearly dropped it when I realized what I was looking at. "Grandma, is this?" She nodded, her eyes twinkling. "The company is yours now, Elizabeth. I see potential in you, kiddo. You've got a good head on your shoulders, and I know you'll do right by the business." "But Mom and Robert, they're running it now." Grandma's face hardened slightly. "They're running a branch. The main company, the heart of it all, that's yours now." I sat there, stunned. Me, barely 18, owner of a multi-million-dollar company? It felt like a dream. Or a nightmare. I don't know what to say. Grandma reached across the desk, squeezing my hand. "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll give it your all." I nodded, still in shock. "I will. I promise." She sat back, satisfied. "Good. Now, I've got one more piece of advice for you, and I want you to listen carefully." I leaned in, hanging on her every word. "Call your father. There's more to that story than you know. Talk to him. Take him on as a consultant if you want. But hear him out." It took me a week to work up the courage to call Dad. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. When I saw him, my heart clenched. He looked older, tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. There was an awkward silence. Then, suddenly, everything came pouring out. The divorce, Mom's remarriage, the move, Grandma's gift. Dad listened, his face a mix of emotions. When I finished, he took a deep breath. "Lizzie, there's something you need to know about the divorce." And then he told me everything. How Mom had never respected him, constantly nagging and putting him down. How she called him a loser, made him feel worthless. How, after one particularly bad fight, he'd gotten drunk and made the biggest mistake of his life. "I cheated on her," he admitted, his voice heavy with shame. "Once. I regretted it immediately, but your mother, she used it against me. Threatened to sue, to take everything. She demanded I leave, give her all the property, leave you kids. She even wanted alimony." I sat there, stunned. This didn't sound like the mother I knew. Or thought I knew. "Why didn't you fight it?" I asked. Dad's eyes met mine, full of sadness and love. "Because of you and Amy. I didn't want you to go through a messy, public divorce. I thought it would be easier this way." As we talked, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my dad back. Before we left, I took a deep breath and asked, "Dad, how would you feel about helping me with the company? As a consultant?" The smile that spread across his face was answer enough. The months flew by in a whirlwind of studying, exams, and late-night cram sessions. Before I knew it, I was standing on the stage at my high school graduation, diploma in hand. Grandma was in the audience, beaming with pride. Mom and Robert were conspicuously absent, but I'd learned not to expect much from that quarter. As summer rolled in, I threw myself into college applications. With Grandma's encouragement and Dad's long-distance support, I set my sights high. When the acceptance letters started rolling in, I could hardly believe it. But the real shocker came when I got the financial aid package from my top choice. "Full ride," I breathed, staring at the letter in disbelief. Grandma hooped, pulling me into a bear hug. "I knew you could do it, kiddo. All those late nights and competitions paid off." I'd chosen to major in business management. It seemed like the smart choice, given that I now had a company to run. The idea still felt surreal, but I was determined to make Grandma proud. To celebrate my college acceptance, Grandma insisted on throwing a little party. Just the two of us, some fancy takeout, and a bottle of sparkling cider. Grandma wasn't about to let me drink champagne, even if I was legally an adult now. We were halfway through our meal when the doorbell rang. Grandma frowned, clearly not expecting anyone. "I'll get it," I said, putting down my fork. I opened the door and felt my stomach drop. There, looking annoyed and impatient, stood my mother and Robert. Before I could say anything, they brushed past me into the house. Mom didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mother, we need to talk about the company. Now." I watched, stunned, as Mom launched into a tirade. She didn't even glance my way, didn't ask about graduation or college. It was like I wasn't even there. "Why can't we access the main accounts?" she demanded. "And why are you blocking the transfer of capital to our subsidiary?" Grandma's eyes narrowed. "Because it's not your decision to make anymore, Helen. The company belongs to Elizabeth now. She's the one who'll decide its future and manage its finances." The room went dead silent. The tension in the room was palpable after Grandma's revelation about the company. I watched as a series of emotions flashed across Mom's face: shock, anger, and then, calculation. Suddenly, her entire demeanor changed. "Elizabeth, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft and sickly sweet. "I've missed you so much. Why don't you come live with us?" I blinked, caught off guard by this sudden change. Mom stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I instinctively stepped back. "We've settled in so nicely in the new city. We have a beautiful house, and there's a room just for you. We could set up a desk, get you a new computer for your studies and work." "No, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I'm happy here. I have my friends, my school. And Grandma needs me." Mom's smile faltered for a second before she rallied. "Well, if that's the issue, we could always move back here. We could live in our old house, just like before. Wouldn't that be nice?" I shook my head. "It's not about the house, Mom. It's everything." I saw the anger building in her eyes, barely contained. Before she could speak, I decided to ask the question that had been burning inside me for months. "Mom, why did you really divorce Dad?" She stiffened, caught off guard. Well, your father, he cheated on me. Multiple times. I was tired of it. He abandoned us for his mistress, didn't even pay alimony." "That's not true," I said. "Dad told me everything. There was only one time, and it was because of how you treated him. He didn't abandon us, you kicked him out. And he's been paying alimony regularly." Mom's face contorted with rage. "How dare you? You ungrateful little brat. You have no right to meddle in my personal life. Everything here belongs to me, and I decide who lives where." Grandma, who had been quietly watching this exchange, finally stepped forward. Her voice was calm but filled with a steel I'd never heard before. "That's quite enough, Helen," she said. "You seem to have forgotten a few key points. This house? The company? They belong to me, not you. I gave the company to Elizabeth because I trust her judgment far more than I trust yours right now. I think it's time for you to leave." I watched, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest, as Grandma firmly ushered Mom and Robert out of the house. The door closed behind them with a final sounding click. As we stood there, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief wash over me. I'd lost something today, the last illusions I had about my mother. But I'd gained something too. A certainty about my path forward, and the knowledge that I wasn't alone on it. "What now?" I asked, my voice muffled against Grandma's shoulder. She pulled back, giving me a small smile. Now we get back to celebrating your college acceptance. And tomorrow, we start planning for your future, your real future, not the one your mother tried to force on you." The morning after the confrontation with Mom and Robert, I woke up to the sound of voices downstairs. Curious, I crept down the stairs and peeked into the living room. To my surprise, I saw Dad sitting on the couch, deep in conversation with Grandma. As I sat down next to them, Grandma explained why she'd called Dad over. "I've been thinking about Amy," she said. "Your mother, well, I'm not sure she's in the best position to care for her right now. I've suggested that your father seek custody of Amy." I felt a surge of hope. "Really? Dad, are you going to do it?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking both nervous and determined. Yeah, I am. It won't be easy, but Amy deserves better than what she's getting right now. I couldn't help it, I threw my arms around him. Thank you, Dad. As we pulled apart, Grandma cleared her throat. There's more, she said. I've hired a private investigator to look into your mother and Robert's affairs. Over the next few weeks, life fell into a strange new rhythm. I started my college classes, throwing myself into my studies with a determination I'd never felt before. Dad came over regularly, and we worked on rebuilding our relationship. It felt good, having him back in my life. Then, about 3 weeks after that morning conversation, Grandma called us both over. Her face was grave as we sat down. The investigator's report came in, she said without preamble. And, well, it's worse than we thought. She laid out the facts, each one hitting like a punch to the gut. Mom had been cheating on Dad for years, long before the divorce. Her affair with Robert had started while she was still married to Dad. There were hotel receipts, records of expensive gifts, all painting a damning picture. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Robert is a con man, Grandma said, her voice hard. He's done this before, seducing wealthy women, convincing them to move assets around, and then disappearing with the money. I felt sick. So when they wanted to move the company's capital? Grandma nodded. Exactly. He was planning to steal it all and run. We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Grandma said that we needed to confront Mom with the truth. The meeting was set for the next day. Mom arrived at Grandma's house looking annoyed and impatient. Her expression changed to one of surprise when she saw Dad there too. What followed was one of the most painful conversations I've ever been part of. Grandma laid out all the evidence, the affair, Robert's history of fraud, his plans to steal from the company. With each revelation, I watched my mother's face, hoping to see some sign of remorse or understanding. Instead, all I saw was denial. This is ridiculous, Mom sputtered. Robert loves me. He would never. You're all just jealous of our happiness. Dad tried to reason with her. Helen, please. Look at the evidence. Think about Amy. Is this really the kind of man you want around our daughter? But Mom wouldn't hear it. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. I don't have to listen to this. Robert is a good man, and I trust him completely. You're all just trying to ruin my life. With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As we sat there, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of what was sure to be a long, difficult battle. But looking at Dad and Grandma, I knew I wasn't facing it alone. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Dad, with Grandma's unwavering support and her lawyer's expertise, filed for custody of Amy. I tried to stay focused on my studies, but it was hard not to get caught up in the drama unfolding around me. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and I insisted on being there. The proceedings were grueling. Mom's lawyer tried to paint Dad as an absent father, but our lawyer came prepared. He presented evidence of Dad's consistent alimony payments, his attempts to stay in touch with us, and the stability of his current living situation. Then came the bombshell, the private investigator's report on Robert's fraudulent past and their plans to embezzle from the company. I watched Mom's face as the evidence was presented. She looked shocked, then angry, then lost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. When the judge announced his decision, granting Dad full custody of Amy, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that Amy would be safe, sadness that it had come to this. As we left the courthouse, Amy in Dad's arms, Mom approached us. This isn't over, she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. Grandma stepped between us. Yes, Helen, it is. Go home. The hits kept coming for Mom after that. The judge ordered her to pay child support to Dad for Amy. It was a reversal that clearly shocked her. She'd always assumed she'd be the one receiving support, not paying it. I threw myself into my studies and learning about the company, trying to distance myself from the ongoing drama. But it was hard to ignore the satisfaction I felt when I heard that Robert had left Mom, running off with another woman and a significant chunk of Mom's personal savings. It was a crisp autumn evening when Dad called me, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Your mother showed up at my place today," he said. "She wanted to reconcile. Said she'd made a mistake, that she wanted us to be a family again." My heart clenched. Part of me, a small, childish part, wanted him to say yes. Wanted our family back the way it used to be. But I knew too much now. We'd all been through too much. I told her no, Dad said firmly. I told her that ship had sailed a long time ago, and that I wouldn't put you or Amy through that again. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Good," I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. "You deserve better, Dad. We all do." There was a pause, and when Dad spoke again, I could hear the smile in his voice. "When did you get so wise, Lizzie?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I learned from the best." As I hung up the phone, I looked around my room at Grandma's house. My textbooks were spread out on the desk, next to a stack of reports from the company. Photos of me with Dad and Amy smiled back at me from the bulletin board. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself a year ago. It wasn't perfect, there was still so much to figure out, so many challenges ahead. But it was real. It was mine. I thought about Mom, suddenly alone after all her scheming and manipulations. I felt a twinge of pity, but it was overshadowed by a sense of justice. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. As for me, I had a family that loved me, a company to run, and a future full of possibilities. It wasn't the path I'd expected, but standing at the threshold of my new life, I realized something important. Time flies when you're juggling college and a multi-million-dollar company. Before I knew it, I was halfway through my degree, buried in textbooks and financial reports. Weekdays were a blur of lectures and late-night study sessions. But weekends? Those were sacred. Every Friday, I'd pack a bag and head home to Dad and Amy. "Lizzie," Amy would squeal, tackling me with a hug the moment I walked in. At 10, she was all gangly limbs and endless energy. Dad would emerge from the kitchen, usually wearing an apron. "Just in time for dinner," he'd say with a grin. Those weekends became my anchor. We'd eat together, Amy chattering about school, Dad and I discussing the company. After Amy went to bed, we'd often stay up late, poring over business strategies. Sundays usually found us at Grandma's. She'd cook up a storm, filling the house with the smell of roast chicken and apple pie. After lunch, we'd sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. "I always knew you had it in you, Elizabeth," Grandma would say, squeezing my hand. As graduation approached, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Dad was true to his word, running the company with skill while preparing me to take over. "I'm ready to hand over the reins whenever you are," he told me one evening. I hugged him tight. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Life wasn't perfect. There were challenges ahead, decisions to be made, a company to run. But as I looked at my little family, Dad, Amy, Grandma, I knew we could face anything together. My name's Grace, and I used to think I had it all figured out. A great job as head of marketing, a loving husband Mark, and a comfortable life. I was paying off our mortgage with my own salary, feeling pretty damn proud of myself for being financially independent. Family was a big part of our lives, too. Mark had a younger brother, Tom, and their mom, Linda, was always around. Their dad had passed away years ago, so the boys made it a point to look after her. I found it touching, honestly. It made me love Mark even more, seeing how he cared for his family. Linda seemed to like me well enough at first. We'd chat over coffee during family gatherings, and she'd always ask about my work. "Marketing, huh?" she'd say, nodding approvingly. "Sounds important." It felt good to have her approval. I wanted to fit in with Mark's family, to be part of their tight-knit group. Our first few years of marriage were filled with weekend barbecues, holiday dinners, and impromptu game nights with the extended family. I remember one Thanksgiving, all of us crammed around Linda's dining table, laughing and talking over each other. "Pass the gravy, will ya?" Mark's uncle bellowed from the end of the table. "You've had enough gravy, old man." Linda shot back, but she was grinning as she handed over the boat. I looked around the table, taking in the familiar faces, feeling a sense of belonging. This was my family now, too. The first cracks started to show during a New Year's Eve party at Linda's house. I was in the kitchen, refilling my glass of wine, when I overheard Linda talking to Mark and Tom in the living room. "Did you see what Carol's wearing?" Linda snickered. "That dress must have cost all of $5. I froze, my hand on the bottle. Carol was Mark's cousin, a single mom struggling to make ends meet. "I'm just saying," Linda continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Some people should know their limits. Don't try to play with the big boys if you can't keep up." I felt my cheeks burn with second-hand embarrassment. This wasn't the warm, welcoming family I thought I knew. I peeked around the corner, watching as Linda leaned in conspiratorially to her sons, all three of them giggling like schoolchildren. As time went on, I couldn't ignore the growing unease I felt around Linda. What I'd initially brushed off as harmless teasing started to look a lot more like meanness. And it wasn't just Carol who was in her crosshairs. At every family gathering, Linda would huddle with Mark and Tom, their heads close together as they whispered and snickered. Their eyes would dart around the room, landing on various relatives and friends, before they'd burst into muffled laughter. One Easter Sunday, I couldn't take it anymore. Linda was holding court in the living room, Mark and Tom flanking her like loyal subjects. "Did you see Janet's new car?" Linda was saying, her voice low, but not low enough. "Probably got it from the buy here pay here lot. I bet she'll be paying it off until she's 80. Before I knew what I was doing, I was on my feet, marching over to Linda's little group. "Hey," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Don't you think that's a bit much? Janet can probably hear you." The room went silent. Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked up at me. Well, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like we've offended your delicate sensibilities, Grace." Mark and Tom exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I just think it's rude," I pressed on, my heart pounding. "Why do you always have to put people down?" Linda's fake smile disappeared. "If you don't like it, you don't have to listen. Why don't you go sit somewhere else?" I felt like I'd been slapped. I looked at Mark, expecting him to back me up, but he just stared at the floor. "Fine," I said, my voice tight. "I will." From that day on, family gatherings became a special kind of hell. I'd sit alone, nursing a drink, while Mark stuck to his mother's side like glue. He'd throw me apologetic glances now and then, but he never came to sit with me. "Why don't you ever stand up to her?" I asked him one night after a particularly awful dinner. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's my mother, Grace. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to tell her she's being cruel. I want you to have my back." But he never did. And slowly, I started finding reasons not to go to these family events. Work emergencies, migraines, anything to avoid the cold stares and whispered insults. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. I was pregnant. I stared at the little plastic stick in my bathroom, my heart racing. 2 pink lines. Clear as day. "Mark," I called out, my voice shaky. "Can you come here?" He appeared in the doorway, his face concerned. "What's wrong?" Wordlessly, I held out the test. His eyes widened as he took it from me. He pulled me into a hug, and for a moment, I felt like maybe everything would be okay. Maybe this baby would bring us closer together, heal the rifts that had been growing between us. But life had other plans. The pregnancy was rough from the start. Constant nausea, dizziness, and a perpetual threat of miscarriage kept me on edge. My doctor put me on bed rest, which meant working remotely. As the weeks went by, my condition worsened. My eyesight started to deteriorate rapidly, a rare complication that my doctor said could be temporary, but might also be permanent. Squinting at my laptop became impossible. With a heavy heart, I had to quit my job. I needed Mark more than ever, but he seemed to be drifting away. He'd come home late from work, citing extra projects or drinks with colleagues. More often than not, I'd fall asleep alone, the echo of the front door closing jolting me awake in the middle of the night. The day of my C-section arrived faster than I expected. My eyesight had worsened to the point where the doctors insisted on the procedure. Natural birth was just too risky. As I lay on the cold operating table, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. "Where's Mark?" I asked the nurse, my voice trembling. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "Your husband's in the waiting room, dear. He said he'd rather stay there." The surgery went smoothly, and soon I heard the most beautiful sound, my son's first cry. As they placed him on my chest, I felt a rush of love so intense it took my breath away. Later, in the recovery room, Mark finally showed up. His face was a mask of discomfort and annoyance. "Look, Grace, I gotta say something. This whole thing? It's not right." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "Normal women give birth on their own, without all this surgery crap. And men? We're not supposed to be here for this. We should be meeting our wives and kids at home, like in the old days." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Mark, I couldn't risk." "Save it," he cut me off. "I'm heading home. This place gives me the creeps." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Mark was rarely home, and when he was, he contributed nothing to our son's care. Instead, he'd complain constantly. "Can't you shut him up?" he'd growl as our baby cried in the middle of the night. "I'm trying," I'd say, exhaustion weighing heavily on me. "He's teething, Mark. It hurts him." But Mark had no patience for it. "All you do is focus on the kid. What about me, huh? What about our sex life?" I'd stare at him in disbelief. Here I was, running on 2 hours of sleep, still recovering from major surgery, and he was worried about sex. As the weeks turned into months, Mark's dissatisfaction grew. One evening, as I was trying to soothe our fussy 6-month-old, he dropped a bombshell. "You need to go back to work," he said flatly. I turned to him, shock written all over my face. "What? But the baby?" "We'll hire a nanny," he interrupted. "We can't keep living like this, Grace. We need the money." I wanted to argue, to tell him that our son needed me, that I wasn't ready. But the determined look in his eyes told me it was pointless. So, with a heavy heart, I started job hunting. Finding work with my compromised vision wasn't easy. I eventually landed a position at a smaller company, but the pay was less than what I'd earned before. When I told Mark, his reaction was predictably negative. "That's it?" he scoffed. "We're paying a nanny for this?" I felt tears pricking at my eyes. "I'm doing my best, Mark. It's not easy with my eyesight." "Excuses," he muttered, walking away. And so began my new reality, rushing to work each morning, guilt gnawing at me as I left my baby with the nanny, struggling through the day with my limited vision, then coming home to a resentful husband and a child who needed me. Time flew by in a haze of work, childcare, and mounting tension at home. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed since my son's birth. Despite the challenges, I loved him fiercely and found joy in his every milestone. Family gatherings remained a source of stress, particularly due to Linda's behavior. She'd sweep in, playing the doting grandmother for show, but her indifference was palpable. "Come to Grandma," she'd coo, arms outstretched to my son. But he'd cling to me, turning his face away from this unfamiliar woman. Linda's face would darken with anger. "What have you been telling him about me?" she'd hiss. "You're turning my own grandson against me." I'd try to explain, my voice tired. "He just doesn't know you well, Linda. If you visited more often..." "Don't you dare blame this on me," she'd snap, stomping off to complain to Mark. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, my world tilted on its axis once again. I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, my heart racing. Positive. I was pregnant. Again. Fear gripped me. My first pregnancy had been so difficult, my health so compromised. Could my body handle another? But as I calculated the weeks, I realized I was already well into the first trimester. The decision, it seemed, had been made for me. With shaking hands, I called Mark at work. "What is it?" he answered, his tone impatient. "Mark, I'm pregnant." There was a long pause. Then, "Look, Grace, I'm busy. We'll talk later. Just, don't quit your job, all right? We can't afford that." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling more alone than ever. Thankfully, this pregnancy proved easier than my first. My morning sickness was manageable, and my vision remained stable. I continued working, determined to provide for my growing family. But as my belly swelled, the distance between Mark and me seemed to grow exponentially. He spent more and more time at his mother's house, often not coming home until late at night. One evening, as I struggled to put our son to bed while balancing my swollen belly, Mark walked in. "Hey," I said, hopeful for some help. "Can you read him a story? I'm exhausted." Mark glanced at us, then at his watch. "Can't. I promised Mom I'd help her move some furniture." "Don't wait up." As the door closed behind him, I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I looked at my son, his big eyes staring up at me trustingly, and at my rounded belly, home to a child I already loved fiercely. As my 7th month of pregnancy rolled around, I found myself preparing for Thanksgiving. Guests started arriving in the afternoon. My parents came early, my mom immediately rolling up her sleeves to help in the kitchen. Friends and relatives trickled in, filling our home with chatter and laughter. Just as I was about to serve dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Tom, Mark's younger brother, and to everyone's surprise, he had a woman with him. "Everyone, this is Melissa," Tom announced, beaming. "My fiancé." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in congratulations. I plastered on a smile, trying to ignore the twinge of jealousy at the way Mark's eyes lit up at the sight of his brother's happiness. Linda arrived shortly after, her eyes widening as she took in Melissa. Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with approval. "Aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" Throughout dinner, Linda fawned over Melissa, peppering her with questions and hanging on her every word. I tried to focus on being a good hostess, but I couldn't help overhearing their conversation. "So, Melissa," Linda said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "Tom tells me you're a manager at National Bank. How prestigious." Melissa nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, I've been there for about 5 years now." Linda beamed. "You must be doing very well for yourself. Unlike some people who can only pop out babies and breed poverty," she added, throwing a pointed look in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. My mother tensed beside me, ready to speak up, but I placed a hand on her arm, silently pleading with her not to make a scene. "You know," Linda continued, her voice sickeningly sweet, "Melissa here makes $15,000 a month. Now that's the kind of daughter-in-law I've always dreamed of. Smart, beautiful, successful." Tears pricked at my eyes as I remembered the years I'd spent supporting our family, paying the mortgage, building a career I was proud of. All of that seemed forgotten now. "I think we should continue this lovely evening somewhere more suitable," Linda announced, standing up. "Melissa, dear, why don't we all go to that new restaurant downtown?" My treat, of course. Before I could process what was happening, Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa were heading for the door. Mark didn't even glance back at me as they left. The remaining guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the festive mood thoroughly ruined. One by one, they made their excuses and left, leaving only my parents behind. They offered to help me, but I refused, saying that they needed to rest themselves. Finally alone, I sank onto the couch and let the tears flow freely. Hours passed as I sobbed, my hand resting on my swollen belly, wondering how my life had come to this. It was nearly dawn when I heard the front door open. Mark stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and cigarette smoke. He didn't say a word as he made his way to the bedroom. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and opened social media. There they were, Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa, grinning for selfies at an expensive nightclub. The caption read, "Best Thanksgiving ever with my real family." As my due date approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The doctors had scheduled my C-section, insisting it was the safest option given that it had been less than 3 years since my last one. I tried to focus on preparing for our new arrival, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Mark. One chilly winter afternoon, I found him unpacking bags full of summer clothes. "What's all this?" I asked, puzzled. Mark shrugged, barely meeting my eyes. "Just saw a good sale. Thought I'd update my wardrobe." It didn't make sense, but with the impending birth occupying my thoughts, I pushed my suspicions aside. I'd been meticulously saving money in a separate account, determined to take a couple of months off work to recover and bond with the new baby. My workplace had approved 2 months of unpaid leave, which was a relief. I'd set aside enough for the mortgage, bills, and even a babysitter for our 3-year-old. For once, I felt prepared. 3 days before my scheduled C-section, chaos erupted. I was resting on the couch when Mark burst through the door, Linda hot on his heels. "Hurry up," Linda barked as Mark rushed to our bedroom. I struggled to my feet, waddling after them. Mark was throwing clothes into a suitcase, the summer clothes he'd bought. "Mark?" I said, my voice rising with panic. "What are you doing?" He barely glanced at me. "Tom's getting married in Hawaii. We're all going." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What? But my C-section is in 3 days. Who's going to take care of our son?" Mark zipped up his suitcase, finally meeting my gaze with cold indifference. "You'll manage. You always do." Before I could respond, he brushed past me, Linda ushering him out. The door slammed, leaving me in stunned silence. Reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I scrambled for my phone, hands shaking as I checked our joint account. Empty. All the money I'd saved, gone. With trembling fingers, I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the final ring. "What?" he snapped. "The money," I choked out. "All our savings. Where is it?" There was a pause, then a cold laugh. "We needed it for Tom's wedding gift. Don't be so greedy, Grace." The line went dead. A sharp pain lanced through my abdomen. I looked down in horror to see a puddle forming at my feet. My water had broken. Panic seized me. I couldn't go into labor now. The risk to my previous C-section scar was too great. With one hand on my belly and the other clutching my phone, I called emergency services. The hospital was chaos, doctors shouting, machines beeping. I woke hours later to the gentle beeping of monitors. My mother's tear-stained face swam into view. "Grace," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "You're okay. The baby's okay." Slowly, the fog lifted. I'd nearly died. My baby had nearly died. But we'd made it. 3 days after the emergency C-section, I was feeling surprisingly strong, both physically and emotionally. The doctors were pleased with my recovery and gave me the green light to go home. Mark hadn't called once since he'd left for Hawaii. Not to check if I was alive, not to ask about his new son. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over. I called my parents and asked to stay with them for a while. Their response was immediate and supportive. My parents doted on both boys, giving me time to rest and recover. I started researching divorce lawyers and gathering documentation of our finances. Then, exactly a week after I'd left the hospital, my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail twice, before finally answering on the third call. "Where the hell are you? Why aren't you at home?" Mark's voice was a mixture of anger and confusion. I took a deep breath. I met my parents, Mark. With both of our sons. I've filed for divorce. There was a moment of stunned silence, then a bark of laughter. Divorce? Are you kidding me? After everything I've done for you? Everything you've done? I felt a surge of anger. You mean like abandoning me right before I gave birth? Or stealing all our savings? Oh, get over it, he scoffed. I'll pay you back, no problem. In fact, I don't even want to see you again. You know why? Because I'm going to be rich. He launched into a tirade about how Tom's new wife had offered him a job as her deputy at the bank. How they were going to start their own financial company. How she was going to make them all wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. You never believed in me, Grace, he spat. You always shot down my ideas, always held me back. Well, guess what? I'm free now. And you? You're just a loser who can't see potential when it's right in front of her. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. To my surprise, Mark didn't contest anything. He returned the money he'd taken from our accounts and agreed to pay alimony. When it came to the house, I had years of mortgage statements proving I'd been the one making payments. The judge awarded it to me without hesitation. The day I returned to my house with the boys, Mark was there, packing up the last of his things. He sneered as I walked in, the baby in my arms and our toddler holding my hand. Enjoy this dump while you can, he said, hefting a box. I'll be in a mansion soon, swimming in cash. You'll see what you missed out on. As he walked out the door, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The house suddenly felt bigger, brighter. A year and a half had passed since the divorce. Life had settled into a new normal for me and my boys. I'd returned to work, finding a balance between my career and motherhood. It wasn't always easy, but we were happy, healthy, and thriving. One ordinary Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a news alert. As I read the headline, my jaw dropped. Local banker exposed as fraud, leaves family in ruins. The article detailed a shocking scandal. Melissa, Tom's wife, had been running an elaborate con. She'd convinced Mark, Tom, and Linda to take out massive loans to fund a non-existent financial company. They'd even mortgaged Linda's house, pouring every penny they had into this imaginary venture. But Melissa wasn't a banker at all. The office she'd shown them was a short-term rental, a prop in her elaborate scheme. She'd disappeared with millions, leaving behind a trail of forged documents and broken dreams. To make matters worse, I discovered they'd taken out an additional loan to fund Tom and Melissa's lavish Hawaiian wedding, the very event Mark had abandoned us for. As I read on, a mix of emotions washed over me. Shock, confusion, and, I'll admit, a twinge of satisfaction. The consequences were severe. Unable to repay their debts, they lost everything. Linda's house, their cars, even their personal belongings, all seized by creditors. They were left with nothing but mountains of debt. I heard through the grapevine that Linda had been forced to take a job as a cashier just to afford a tiny apartment and groceries. Mark and Tom were in similar straits, their dreams of wealth and success shattered. I was beyond grateful that I divorced Mark when I did. My children and I were safe, unaffected by the financial disaster that had befallen my ex-husband's family. Just when I thought I'd put it all behind me, my phone rang. Linda's number flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Grace? Linda's voice was small, a far cry from her usual imperious tone. We need your help. She launched into a plea, asking if they could stay with us. The children need their father and grandmother, she insisted. You can't leave family in trouble. I took a deep breath, memories flooding back, of Thanksgiving humiliation, of being abandoned before my C-section, of the countless times they belittled and dismissed me. Family? I said, my voice steady. You weren't concerned about family when you left me alone, pregnant, and in danger. You weren't concerned about family when you stole my savings. You weren't concerned about family when you called me a loser. Linda started to protest, but I cut her off. I'm sorry you're in this situation, Linda. But I'm not responsible for the choices you, Mark, and Tom made. My priority is my children, and I won't expose them to the chaos you've created. Please don't contact me again. I hung up, then immediately blocked her number. As I set down the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was done. Truly done. My name's Laura, and I'm the younger of two sisters in what you might call a blended family. But blended implies some kind of harmony, and let me tell you, there wasn't much of that growing up. My mom had been married before, to some guy who died when my half-sister was 5. Then she met my dad, they got hitched, and pop. Out I came a year later. Sounds like a neat little package, right? Wrong. See, my mom had this house she inherited from her first husband. Nice place, nothing too fancy. She also owned a sewing factory. After she and my dad tied the knot, she asked him to help run the business. They made a good team, I'll give him that. Dad handled the money stuff, Mom took care of making things and dealing with people. They doubled the company's profits in no time. I remember overhearing them talk about the future once when I was little. They were in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. I hope the girls will take over someday, Mom said. Keep it in the family, you know? Dad agreed. That'd be great. Laura's got a good eye for design already. And Sarah's sharp with numbers. Little did they know, Sarah had other ideas. My dear half-sister never let me forget that everything, the house, the business, even the damn spoons we ate with, belonged to her and Mom. This is my house, she'd say, blocking the door to her room. You're just living in it, 'cause your dad mooches off Mom. I was too young to understand why she was so mean. I just wanted to play with her cool toys or borrow a pencil to draw. But every time I touched something, she'd snatch it away. That's mine, she'd screech. My real dad bought it before he died. You can't have it. Mom tried to stop her. Sarah, honey, that's not nice. Laura's your sister. Half-sister, Sarah would spit back. And she gets everything. It's not fair. Dad never said much during these fights. He'd just pat my head and tell me to ignore her. But how could I? She made my life hell. One day, I found some colored pencils in the living room. I was so excited, finally, I could draw the beautiful dresses I saw in my head. I started sketching, lost in my own little world. Then Sarah stormed in. Those are mine, she yelled, grabbing the pencils. Before I could stop her, she tore up my drawings. I ran to Mom, sobbing. She hugged me tight and marched over to Sarah's room. That's enough, I heard her shout. You will not treat your sister this way. But nothing changed. Sarah kept finding ways to remind me I didn't belong. And as we got older, it only got worse. As we grew older, my parents tried their best to keep the peace. They'd buy us the same clothes, give us equal gifts on holidays. But it was never enough for Sarah. Laura's sweater is softer, she'd complain. Or, her necklace has more jewels. You always give her the best stuff. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. In Sarah's mind, I was the favorite, the interloper stealing her rightful place. When I was about 10, my parents decided to sell the old house and buy a bigger one. I remember the day we moved in, how excited I was to have my own room. This is amazing, I squealed, twirling around the empty space. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face dark. Don't get too comfortable. This house belongs to me and Mom. You're just a guest here. I felt my stomach drop. Even in this new place, nothing had changed. Later that night, I heard Mom and Dad talking in hushed tones. I don't know what to do anymore, Mom sighed. I've tried everything with Sarah. Maybe we should take her to see someone, Dad suggested. A therapist or counselor? Mom agreed, and soon Sarah was going to weekly sessions. But if anything, it only made her more resentful. "Oh, so now I'm crazy," she spat one day after a particularly rough appointment. "You just want to fix me so precious Laura can have a perfect life." I wanted to scream that my life was far from perfect with her in it, but I kept my mouth shut. It never did any good to argue with Sarah. As the years went by, Sarah's victim complex only grew. Everything was someone else's fault, usually mine. She'd complain endlessly about how unfair her life was, how no one understood her. "You're all against me," she'd say. "You owe me for everything I've been through." I started avoiding her as much as possible, staying in my room or at friends' houses. Anything to escape the constant drama. When Sarah finally graduated high school and left for college in another city, it felt like the whole house breathed a collective sigh of relief. "Maybe some time away will do her good," Mom said hopefully. For the first time in years, I felt like I could relax in my own home. No more walking on eggshells, no more surprise attacks of Sarah's jealousy. Those 4 years while Sarah was away at college were the happiest of my young life. I threw myself into my studies, especially art and design. I'd spend hours sketching clothes, dreaming up new styles. Mom noticed my passion and started bringing home scraps of fabric from the factory for me to play with. "You've got a real talent, Laura," she'd say, admiring my creations. For once, I felt seen for who I was, not just as Sarah's annoying little sister. I started to imagine a future where I could use my skills, maybe even in the family business. After graduation, I'd been accepted to a college in another city to study design, which was a dream come true. The night before I left for college, Mom and Dad sat me down for a talk. "We're so proud of you, Laura," Mom said, her eyes misty. "You know we support your dreams, right?" I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. Dad chimed in. "We hope that after you graduate, you'll consider coming back to work with us. Your designs could really take the company to the next level." I promised to think about it, but honestly, I was eager to spread my wings. The idea of returning to my hometown, where Sarah's shadow still loomed, wasn't exactly appealing. College life was everything I'd hoped for and more. It was during my second year that I met him. Jason. He was a few years older, working on his master's in business. We bumped into each other at a campus coffee shop. Quite literally, I spilled my latte all over his shirt. We got to talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. Jason was funny, smart, and actually listened when I talked about my designs. We started dating soon after. As graduation approached, Jason and I talked about our future. We'd been together for over 2 years by then, and things were getting serious. "I've got a job lined up here in the city," he told me one night over dinner. "What do you think about staying here? Maybe, together?" My heart soared at the idea. I'd landed a position as a junior designer at an up-and-coming fashion company, and the thought of building a life with Jason away from all the family drama was incredibly tempting. But I knew I had to tell my parents face to face. So, we planned a trip back to my hometown. I was nervous about introducing Jason to my family, especially since I knew Sarah would be there too. To my surprise, the visit went better than I could have hoped. Mom and Dad loved Jason, and even Sarah was, well, not exactly warm, but at least civil. She didn't make any snide comments or try to undermine me, which was a first. Over dinner, I broke the news about my job and my plans to stay in the city. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, but I could see a hint of disappointment in her eyes. Dad cleared his throat. "Actually, we had an idea we wanted to run by you. What if you opened a branch of our company in your city? You could be in charge of design, create your own line." I was stunned. It was a generous offer, one that would allow me to pursue my dreams while still being part of the family business. "Can I think about it?" I asked. They agreed, and the rest of the visit passed pleasantly. As Jason and I were leaving, Sarah pulled me aside. "Hey, I know things haven't always been great between us," she said, looking uncomfortable. "But I'd like to try and change that. Maybe I could visit you sometime?" I was skeptical, but nodded. "Sure, that'd be nice." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after Jason and I returned from my hometown. I threw myself into my new job, learning the ropes and impressing my bosses with my designs. Jason and I started talking about marriage, looking at apartments, dreaming of our future together. Everything seemed perfect. Then, about 3 months after our visit home, I got a surprise call from Sarah. "Hey, little sis," she said, sounding oddly cheerful. "I'm in town. Mind if I crash at your place for a bit?" I nearly dropped the phone in shock. Sarah, voluntarily coming to see me? It seemed too good to be true. But I remembered her olive branch from our last meeting and decided to give her a chance. When Sarah arrived, I barely recognized her. Gone was the scowling, resentful girl I'd grown up with. This Sarah was all smiles and hugs. Over dinner that first night, she dropped a bomb on me. "I've been thinking," she said, twirling pasta on her fork. "Why don't you come back home? We could work together at the family business. It'd be great." I nearly choked on my wine. "What? But I just started my job here. And Jason?" Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "Bring him along. There's plenty of opportunity back home." I shook my head. "Thanks, but no. Actually, Mom and Dad suggested I open a branch here. I'm still considering it." For a moment, I saw a flash of the old Sarah, a tightening around her eyes, a slight downturn of her mouth. But it passed so quickly, I thought I might have imagined it. "Well, if you won't come home, maybe I could stay here a while longer?" she asked. "We've got so much catching up to do." Against my better judgment, I agreed. And to my surprise, living with Sarah wasn't the nightmare I'd expected. She was helpful, even taking over most of the household chores. We'd stay up late, talking about our childhood, laughing over shared memories. It felt like I was finally getting the sister I'd always wanted. One night, over a bottle of wine, Sarah brought up the idea of us working together again. "What if we opened that branch together?" she suggested. "You handle the design, I'll do the business side. We'd make a great team." The idea was tempting. Despite our rocky past, Sarah and I had been getting along so well. And having her business acumen could really help get the new branch off the ground. "Let me think about it," I said, not wanting to commit just yet. As the weeks passed, Jason started coming over more often. At first, I was nervous about how he and Sarah would get along, given our history. But to my relief, they seemed to hit it off. I'd come home from work to find them laughing over inside jokes, or deep in discussion about some business concept. It warmed my heart to see two important people in my life getting along so well. Jason and I set a date for our wedding, just 6 months away. I designed the invitations, carefully curated the guest list, and agonized over every detail of the menu and decorations. Sarah was there every step of the way, offering suggestions and support. Meanwhile, Jason and I had decided to open the branch of my family's company after the wedding. Sarah and I spent many evenings discussing our plans, getting more excited with each conversation. "We're going to make an amazing team," Sarah said one night, clinking her wine glass against mine. 2 months before the big day, I was juggling work, wedding prep, and future business plans. Life was hectic, but wonderful. Then came the call that changed everything. "Laura, it's Dad," his voice sounded strained over the phone. "Your mother, she's not well. She's been feeling poorly for a while, but you know your mother, always putting on a brave face." He paused, and I could hear the worry in his silence. "I'm struggling to keep up with everything, the business, the house." I didn't hesitate. "I'm coming home. Right now." When I told Sarah, she sighed. "I wish I could come with you, but I've got some important meetings I can't reschedule." I was surprised by her reluctance, but didn't push it. "It's okay. I'll keep you updated." The situation at home was worse than I'd imagined. Mom looked pale and fragile, nothing like the vibrant woman I remembered. The doctor's diagnosis was devastating, a tumor, requiring immediate surgery. I threw myself into action, taking over household chores, helping Dad with the business where I could, and most importantly, being there for Mom. I arranged to work remotely, squeezing in design work between hospital visits and home care. The days blurred together in a haze of worry and exhaustion. But finally, there was good news. The surgery was successful, and Mom was recovering well. Through it all, I tried to stay connected with Jason. We'd video chat daily at first, his face a comforting presence on my screen. "How's your mom doing?" he'd ask, his brow furrowed with concern. "Better today," I'd reply, forcing a smile. "How are things there? Is Sarah behaving herself?" He'd laugh and assure me everything was fine, but as the days passed, our conversations grew shorter and less frequent. I told myself it was just the stress of the situation, that things would go back to normal once I returned home. But a month into my stay, the video calls stopped altogether. My messages went unanswered. The silence was deafening. The gnawing worry in my gut wouldn't let up. After days of unanswered calls and messages, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see Jason, to find out what was going on. I caught the next flight out, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe Jason was sick. Maybe he'd lost his phone. Maybe. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Some part of me wanted to surprise Jason, to see his face light up when he saw me. The silence that greeted me in my apartment was eerie. Then I heard it, a muffled giggle from the bedroom. Our bedroom. I wish I could say I hesitated, that I didn't barge in like some crazed person. But I did. And what I saw, God, I'll never forget it. Jason and Sarah. In our bed, naked and entwined. For a moment, the world stopped. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then reality came crashing down. "What the hell?" I screamed, my voice breaking. They jumped apart, but neither looked particularly ashamed. If anything, they looked relieved. "Laura," Sarah said, wrapping the sheet around herself. "We didn't expect you back so soon." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You didn't expect? Are you kidding me? That's all you have to say?" Jason at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Sarah stood up, still clutching the sheet. "Look, sis, these things happen. Jason and we're in love." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "In love? You've known each other for what, a few months?" "Sometimes you just know," Jason said, reaching for Sarah's hand. "We didn't mean for this to happen, but..." "But what?" I interrupted. "You just accidentally fell into bed together?" Sarah smiled sweetly. "Laura, you should be happy for us. In fact, we were hoping you'd understand. Maybe even, let us use your wedding plans?" I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What?" "Well, everything's already paid for," she explained, as if talking to a child. "It seems a shame to waste it. We could celebrate our engagement instead." I don't remember leaving the apartment. I don't remember the trip back to my parents' house. I just remember collapsing into my childhood bed, sobbing until I had no tears left. Mom and Dad found me like that. They didn't push, just sat with me until I was ready to talk. When I finally told them everything, Dad's face turned red with anger. Mom just looked sad. "I'll call her," Dad said, reaching for his phone. "This ends now." The conversation was short and brutal. I could hear Sarah's voice, shrill and defensive, through the speaker. "Of course you're taking her side," she yelled. "You always have." "Well, guess what? For once, I'm the one who got chosen." "How does it feel, Laura?" Dad's voice was cold. "Sarah, if you go through with this, you're no longer part of this family. Do you understand?" There was a pause, then Sarah's voice, dripping with venom. "Fine. I don't need you anyway. I've got Jason now." The line went dead. Mom pulled me into a hug, her still fragile body shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I clung to her, feeling like a little girl again. But I wasn't a little girl anymore. I was a woman who'd just had her heart ripped out by the two people she should have been able to trust most in the world. The days following the revelation of Sarah and Jason's betrayal passed in a blur. One moment, I'd be curled up in bed, unable to face the world. The next, I'd be researching lawyers, ready to sue them for every penny I'd spent on the wedding. It was during one of these angry research sessions that my phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello?" I answered warily. "Laura? It's Margaret, Jason's mother." I nearly hung up, but something in her voice stopped me. She sounded devastated. "I don't know what to say," Margaret continued. "We're so sorry, dear. So very sorry." I listened in stunned silence as she poured out her heart. How shocked and disappointed they were in Jason. How they'd always thought of me as a daughter. How they couldn't believe Sarah could do this to her own sister. "We want to make this right," Margaret said finally. "We know it won't fix everything, but we'd like to reimburse you for all the wedding expenses." True to their word, a check arrived a few days later, covering every last expense. It was a weight off my shoulders I hadn't even realized I was carrying. As the date of what would have been my wedding approached, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to the city, not yet. There were too many memories, too much pain. Would it be okay if I stayed here for a while? I asked Mom and Dad over dinner one night. Maybe work for the company? They exchanged a look, then Dad smiled. "We were hoping you'd say that. We could use your talents, especially in design." And just like that, I had a new direction. I threw myself into work with a fervor that surprised even me. Every sketch, every design, was a middle finger to Sarah and Jason. "Look what you gave up," I thought bitterly. "Look what you lost." The day of Sarah and Jason's wedding came and went. We didn't attend, of course. I spent the day locked in my office, working on a new line of youth clothing I'd been dreaming up. Months passed. My designs started gaining traction. The youth line was a hit, bringing in a whole new demographic of customers. Within a year, I'd helped increase the company's turnover by $1 million. Sarah and Jason? They were dead to me. I didn't think about them, didn't wonder what they were doing or if they were happy. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. 3 years passed in a blur of fabric swatches, design meetings, and growing success. I'd thrown myself into work, using my pain as fuel to drive our family business to new heights. Our company had become a major player in the fashion industry, and I'd made a name for myself as an innovative designer. One balmy summer evening, I was having dinner with Mom and Dad at their place. We were laughing over some silly memory when the doorbell rang. Dad frowned. "Are we expecting anyone?" I shook my head, a strange feeling of unease settling in my stomach. Mom went to answer the door, and suddenly the air was filled with a voice I hadn't heard in years. Well, look at this cozy family dinner," Sarah sneered, pushing past Mom into the dining room. "Glad to see you're all doing so well without me." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" She looked different. Haggard, angry, with dark circles under her eyes. "Oh, just thought I'd drop by, see how the other half lives," she spat. "Especially now that I'm newly single." Dad's eyes narrowed. "What happened to Jason?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out, once a cheater, always a cheater. He left me for his secretary." Ironic, isn't it? I felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy, but a grim satisfaction. Karma, indeed. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not entirely truthfully. "But why are you here?" Sarah's face hardened. "I want what's mine. My share of the business. I'm family too, remember?" Dad stood up, his voice firm. "Sarah, you gave up any claim to this family and this business when you betrayed your sister. You're not getting anything. You can't do this," Sarah screamed, her composure cracking. "You can't just cut me out." Mom stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. "We already have, Sarah. You're disinherited. please leave." For a moment, I thought Sarah might lash out physically. But instead, she just glared at us all, her eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed, before storming out. A few days later, I was in my office when I heard a commotion from the lobby. I rushed down to find Sarah in the middle of our workspace, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You're all being deceived," she yelled at our bewildered employees. "My parents are unscrupulous liars. They've stolen what's rightfully mine." I didn't hesitate. I called the police, keeping my voice calm despite the chaos around me. "We need officers at Fashion Forward Designs immediately. We have an unstable individual causing a disturbance." Even as security tried to remove her, Sarah kept fighting. Over the next few days, she escalated her attacks, trying to break into our parents' house, smashing windows, and in a final, terrifying act, attempting to set fire to the front door. It was clear this couldn't go on. With heavy hearts, we took legal action, obtaining a restraining order that banned Sarah from approaching me, our parents, or any of our properties. As I sat in my office after the court hearing, looking out over the city I'd come to love, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for the sister I'd lost, anger at her actions, but also pride in how far I'd come. I was now a respected entrepreneur and fashion designer, my name known throughout the industry. Love? That could wait. The wounds from Jason's betrayal had healed, but I wasn't ready to risk my heart again. Not yet. For now, I was content to pour my passion into my designs, into building something lasting and beautiful. I never thought my life would turn out like this. My name's Rita, and this is my story. I was born to farmers, good people who taught me the value of hard work from the day I could walk. Our days started before dawn, tending to the animals and crops. Life was simple back then. I'd go to school, come home, and help around the farm. Weekends were for family time and catching up on chores. I didn't know any different, and I didn't want to. But things changed when I graduated high school. My parents, bless their hearts, wanted more for me than a life on the farm. "Rita, we've been talking," Dad said one evening as we sat around the dinner table. "Your mom and I think you should go to college." And just like that, my world expanded. I packed my bags and moved to the city, a place so different from everything I'd known that it might as well have been another planet. College was an experience. The classes were interesting enough, but it was the people that really opened my eyes. Kids from all walks of life, with dreams and ambitions I'd never even considered. And then there was Jack. I met him in my second year. He was charming, confident, and so different from the farm boys back home. Jack knew exactly what he wanted from life, or so I thought. "Life's too short to waste it working yourself to the bone," he'd say, lounging on the grass outside the library. "We should enjoy ourselves while we're young." I was smitten. Here was someone who saw life as an adventure, not just an endless series of chores. We started dating, and before I knew it, we were talking about marriage. When I told my parents, they were cautious. They wanted to meet Jack, to get to know the man who'd stolen their daughter's heart. "He seems nice enough," Dad said after Jack's first visit to the farm. "But there's something, I don't know." "Just be careful, Rita." I brushed off his concerns. What did my old-fashioned father know about modern love? Jack was perfect, and we were going to have a perfect life together. My parents, bless them, paid for our wedding and even bought us an apartment in the city. "We want you to have a good start," Mom said, her eyes misty. "Thanks, Mom, Dad," I said, hugging them tight. "I promise I'll make you proud." As Jack and I stood at the altar, exchanging vows and rings, I thought my life was set. I had a husband who loved me, a good job in the city, and a bright future ahead. The first couple of years of our marriage were, well, I thought they were good. Jack and I both had jobs in the city, and we settled into a routine. But looking back, I can see the cracks that were forming even then. "Rita, do we have to go to your parents' farm this weekend?" Jack would whine every time I suggested a visit. It smells like manure, and your dad always wants me to help with something. I'd sigh and try to reason with him. They're my family, Jack. And they've done so much for us. Fine, he'd grumble. But I'm not shoveling any cow crap. I brushed it off as city boy squeamishness. After all, I'd grown up with those smells and chores. But now I wonder if I should have seen it as a red flag. 2 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. I was over the moon, and my parents were ecstatic. A grandchild, Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Rita, we're so happy for you." Jack's reaction was less enthusiastic. "A kid? Already? I guess that's okay." I chalked it up to nerves. Surely he'd warm up to the idea of being a father. My parents, bless their hearts, continued to support us. They bought us a car, paid for vacations. I was grateful, but Jack seemed to take it all for granted. "Of course they're helping us," he'd say. "That's what parents do." When our son, Tommy, was born, I fell in love all over again. But Jack, well, he tried, I'll give him that. But fatherhood didn't come naturally to him. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" he'd complain when Tommy cried at night. "Some of us have to work in the morning." I'd bite my tongue and remind myself that we were both adjusting to parenthood. Life went on. We visited the farm when we could, though Jack's reluctance grew with each trip. "Your dad asked me to help fix the tractor again," he'd grouse. "I'm not a mechanic, for Christ's sake." I'd watch my dad and Jack working together, oil-stained and sweaty. Dad would be patient, explaining each step, while Jack would grimace and fumble with the tools. Then, tragedy struck. Within a year, both my parents passed away. I was devastated. "They're gone, Jack," I sobbed into his shoulder. "I can't believe they're gone." He patted my back awkwardly. "It'll be okay. At least they left us the farm." His words jolted me. The farm. My family's legacy. And all Jack could think about was what we'd inherited? In the midst of my grief, Jack dropped a bombshell. "We should sell the farm," he said one night over dinner. "We could buy a big house in the city. Live like kings." I wanted to argue, to fight for my family's legacy. But I was tired, worn down by grief and the demands of motherhood. And wasn't a wife supposed to support her husband's decisions? "Okay," I said quietly. "If you think it's best." And just like that, with a few signatures on some papers, my family's history was sold off to the highest bidder. The money went into our joint account, and Jack was like a kid in a candy store. "We're set for life, Rita," he crowed. "No more slaving away at work. We can do whatever we want." I nodded and smiled, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. This was what Jack wanted, and I was his wife. I had to support him, right? Life after selling the farm was different. The money from the sale cushioned us nicely, I'll give Jack that. We didn't have to work as hard anymore. We both cut back to part-time hours, and for a while, it felt like we were living the dream. But as the years went by, I started noticing things. Jack, who'd never been a hard worker to begin with, seemed to lose all motivation. He'd quit jobs at the drop of a hat, always with some excuse. "That boss was a jerk," he'd say, or "they expected too much." "I'm not a slave, you know." I'd try to reason with him. "Jack, we can't live off the farm money forever. We need to think about our future." He'd wave me off. "Relax, Rita. We're set for life. Why work ourselves to death?" Meanwhile, our son Tommy was growing up fast. He graduated high school, then college, and before I knew it, he was working and living on his own. I was proud of him, but I missed having him around. Then one day, I was flipping through the newspaper when a name caught my eye. It was an article about a successful concrete production plant, owned by none other than Jack's uncle, Robert. "Jack," I called out, "did you see this article about your Uncle Robert?" Jack's face darkened. "I don't want to hear about that old tyrant," he snapped. I knew the story, or at least Jack's version of it. How his parents had died when he was young, leaving him in the care of his uncle. How Robert had been overbearing and controlling, trying to force Jack into the family business. He never listened to what I wanted, Jack had told me years ago. It was always about what he thought was best. So I left. Started my own life. Looking at Jack now, lounging in his robe at 2 in the afternoon, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Maybe it's time to make peace? I suggested gently. It's been years, Jack. People change. Jack's reaction was explosive. Make peace? With that control freak? No way in hell, Rita. Drop it. I let it go, but the incident left me unsettled. There was so much anger there, so much resentment. It made me wonder what else Jack was carrying around, what other parts of himself he was hiding. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I overheard Jack on the phone. His voice was curt, dismissive. I am not interested in his life and it does not concern me, he said sharply before hanging up. My curiosity got the better of me. Who was that, honey? Jack's face was a mask of indifference. Hospital. My uncle's sick. If he kicks the bucket, at least I'll finally get something out of him. I stared at him, shocked. Jack, that's a terrible thing to say. He raised you. Yeah, and made my life hell, he snapped. I'm not going to see him. End of story. As I watched Jack settle back into his armchair, remote in hand, something inside me snapped. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. Without a word to Jack, I went to our bedroom and called Tommy. Hey, sweetie, I said when he picked up. How would you feel about meeting your great-uncle? Tommy was surprised, but agreed readily. An hour later, we were walking into the hospital, my heart pounding. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and hushed voices. And there, in a bed surrounded by monitors, lay Jack's uncle Robert. He looked small and frail, nothing like the tyrannical figure Jack had described. When we introduced ourselves, his eyes filled with tears. Rita, Tommy, he said, his voice weak but warm. Oh, I've wanted to meet you for so long. Over the next hour, Robert told us his side of the story. How he'd taken Jack in after his parents died, raised him as his own. I loved that boy, Robert said, his voice cracking. I wanted him to have everything. To carry on the family business, to have a good life. But Jack, it seemed, had other ideas. He said he didn't want the responsibility, Robert continued. Said he didn't want to work hard like I did, staying up nights worrying about the business. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as Robert's words painted a picture I recognized all too well. Jack demanded I sell the business, Robert said, shaking his head. Wanted me to set him up with a monthly allowance, an apartment, a car. Said I owed him a carefree life. I glanced at Tommy, seeing my own shock mirrored in his face. I told him that's not how life works, Robert went on. That money needs to be earned. I begged him to stay, to learn the business. But he just got angry. Said he'd find a rich wife and never have to work a day in his life. As I sat there in Uncle Robert's hospital room, memories from the past decade started flooding back. Like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place, I saw our life together in a new, harsh light. Jack had never held a job for long. He always chose part-time work, called in sick often, took countless days off. I'd attributed it to stress, to him being a free spirit. But now I saw the truth. Life is for pleasure, Rita, he'd always say. Why kill ourselves working? I felt sick to my stomach as realization dawned. Jack hadn't married me for love. He'd married me for my family's money, for the comfortable life he thought I could provide. I was just a means to an end, the rich bride he'd promised his uncle he'd find. Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of this truth settled on me. Our whole life together, our marriage, our family, it was all built on a lie. Uncle Robert's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice weak. I won't be able to leave anything to you or Tommy. I wanted to, but... It's okay, I said, squeezing his hand. We don't need anything. I had plans, Robert continued, growing agitated. A new project. It would have changed everything. But I ran out of time. Suddenly, Robert's face contorted in pain. The machines around him started beeping urgently. You need to leave, a nurse said, rushing in. Now. A few days later, the call came. Uncle Robert had passed away. When I told Jack, his reaction made my blood run cold. Finally, he exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. Took the old bastard long enough. I stared at him, disgusted. Jack, he was your uncle. He raised you. He waved dismissively. Yeah. So, when's the funeral? Do we need to go to that? In the end, Jack didn't attend. Tommy and I organized the funeral ourselves, a small, dignified affair that I hoped would have made Uncle Robert proud. While I was grieving for a man I'd barely known, my husband was at home, gleefully calculating his newfound wealth. The factory's got to be worth at least 10 million, I heard him saying on the phone when I got home. Can you believe it? I'm rich. I watched him strut around our house, boasting about his inheritance, and felt nothing but revulsion. This wasn't the man I thought I'd married. This was a stranger wearing my husband's face. And then, things got worse. You know, Rita, Jack said one evening, his eyes cold. You're getting kind of old for me. I think I'm ready for an upgrade. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Excuse me? He shrugged, not even bothering to look ashamed. You heard me. I'm rich now. I can do better. Over the next few weeks, Jack's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd stay out late, coming home in the early hours reeking of booze and perfume. More than once, I spotted lipstick stains on his collar. Each time I confronted him, he'd brush me off. Mind your own business, he'd sneer. You should be grateful I come home at all. As I lay awake one night, listening to Jack stumble in at 3 a.m., I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this. I deserved better. But more importantly, I needed to know the truth about everything, about Jack, about the inheritance, about the life I thought we'd built together. One morning, after another night of Jack stumbling in at dawn, I'd had enough. Where were you? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Jack sneered, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. None of your damn business, Rita. You should be grateful I come back at all. I recoiled as if I'd been slapped. Grateful? Is that what you think our marriage is? He ignored my question, instead fixing me with a calculating look. Say, how much is left from your parents' inheritance? We must have some savings, right? The sudden change of topic threw me off guard. What, Jack, we've spent it all. The accounts are empty. His face twisted into an ugly mask of disgust. Empty? You've got to be kidding me. He paced the room, muttering to himself. Then he turned back to me, his eyes cold. Well, I guess that's it then. I'm done here. Done with you. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Tommy walked in, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Jack's demeanor changed instantly. He plastered on a fake smile and approached our son. Tommy, my boy. Just the person I wanted to see. I need you to sign something for me. He produced a document from his pocket, thrusting it at Tommy. It's just a formality. You're renouncing any claim to Uncle Robert's estate. Since there's no will, it all comes to me anyway. Tommy glanced at me, confusion clear on his face. But after my nod, he took the paper and signed it without hesitation. Jack's grin was triumphant as he snatched back the document. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he turned back to me, all pretense gone. I want a divorce, he announced, his voice cold and flat. I never loved you, Rita. I just tolerated you for your parents' money. But now I'm rich. I don't need you anymore. The words hit me like physical blows. even though I'd suspected, hearing it laid out so brutally. "I'm moving to Uncle Robert's house," Jack continued, already pulling out a suitcase. "Don't try to contact me. It's over." And just like that, he was gone. 30 years of marriage, packed away in a suitcase, and walked out the door. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. "Mom?" Tommy's voice was soft, concerned. "Mom, are you okay?" I turned to my son, my rock, and felt the dam break. Tears streamed down my face as Tommy wrapped his arms around me. "It's okay, Mom," he murmured, holding me tight. "We'll get through this. You're strong. You'll be okay." As I clung to my son, sobbing into his shoulder, a small part of me marveled at the man he'd become. Kind, compassionate, everything his father wasn't. And I realized something. "You're the best thing he ever did," I whispered to Tommy. "The only good thing to come out of this marriage." Tommy squeezed me tighter, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I wasn't alone. I had my son, and together, we'd face whatever came our way. The weeks following Jack's departure were a blur of pain and disbelief. I tried to keep my head high, to focus on moving forward, but it wasn't easy. Especially when Jack seemed determined to flaunt his new life in my face. It started with the Facebook posts. Pictures of Uncle Robert's mansion, now Jack's new home, flooded his timeline. I tried to ignore it, to focus on healing, but then the photos changed. A young woman started appearing in them. Blonde, beautiful, barely older than our son. In one photo, Jack had his arm around her, both of them grinning at the camera. The caption made my stomach churn. "Meet my fiancé, Candy. Upgrade complete." The call started almost immediately. Friends, acquaintances, even Tommy's old school teachers. All of them asking questions I didn't want to, answer. "Rita, dear, is everything okay? We saw Jack's posts, what's going on? Are you and Jack really?" I couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation, the constant reminders of Jack's betrayal, it was too much. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Jack and asked to meet, after consulting with a lawyer. The day of the meeting arrived. I waited at our old favorite cafe, divorce papers in hand. Jack swaggered in, Candy on his arm. She couldn't have been more than 25, her face caked with makeup, giggling at something Jack whispered in her ear. Well, Jack sneered, pulling out a chair for Candy. "If it isn't the old ball and chain. Candy, honey, meet Rita, the starter wife." Candy gave me a pitying look that made my blood boil. But I kept my cool. "I have the divorce papers here," I said, sliding them across the table. "I'm not asking for much, just the house. You can keep everything else." To my surprise, he picked up the pen without argument. "Fine, have your little house. I've got bigger and better things now." He scrawled his signature across the documents. He turned to Candy, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Now I can finally be with someone I truly love. Someone worthy of me." I gathered the papers, my hands shaking slightly. As I walked out of the cafe, I heard Jack's mocking laughter behind me. But I didn't look back. I had what I came for. The next day, I filed for divorce. As I handed over the papers to the court clerk, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Life has a funny way of serving up justice when you least expect it. For me, it came in the form of a headline splashed across the local newspaper. "Local business tycoon's empire crumbles, nephew left with massive debt." It turned out that Uncle Robert had taken out an enormous loan just before his death, hoping to expand the business. He'd mentioned something about a new project during our hospital visit, but Tommy and I hadn't understood the implications at the time. Now it all made sense. I watched from afar as Jack's new life crumbled around him. He sold the factory, the mansion, the cars, everything. And still, he was left owing nearly $1 million. The cherry on top? His young bride, Candy, packed her bags and left the moment she realized Jack wasn't the wealthy catch she'd thought he was. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with Jack. Then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Jack standing there, looking nothing like the smug, wealthy man who'd walked out on me months ago. He was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Rita," he said, his voice cracking. "I've been such a fool. I see that now. Please, can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I let him in. For the next hour, I listened as Jack poured out his heart. He told me how he'd lost everything, how he'd realized what truly mattered in life. "I was wrong, Rita," he said, his eyes pleading. "So wrong. But I see now that you were the only one who ever truly cared for me. The only one I've ever really loved." Then, to my utter disbelief, Jack got down on one knee, producing a small velvet box. "Rita, please. Give me another chance. Marry me again. Together, we can overcome anything." For a moment, I was speechless. Then, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. It started as a small chuckle and grew into full-blown, tears streaming down my face laughter. Jack's face fell. "What's so funny?" When I finally caught my breath, I looked him straight in the eye. "Oh, Jack. Did you really think it would be that easy? That you could treat me like garbage, throw me away, and then come crawling back when things got tough?" His expression darkened. "Now listen here," he snarled, jumping to his feet. "This is my house too. I have rights." I calmly walked to the drawer where I kept our divorce papers, pulling them out and showing him his own signature. "No, Jack, you don't. You signed away any claim to this house. It's mine. Now get out, or I'll call the cops." For a moment, I thought he might try to argue further. But something in my expression must have told him I meant business. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, I called Tommy and told him everything. My wonderful son was supportive as always. "You did the right thing, Mom," he said. "I'm proud of you." Those words meant more to me than he could ever know. In the weeks that followed, I made some big decisions. The house, with all its memories both good and bad, felt too big for just me. So I sold it, using the money to buy a cozy apartment in a vibrant neighborhood I'd always loved. At 60, I'm finding that life is just beginning. I've started traveling, seeing all the places Jack always promised we'd visit but never did. I've taken up painting, joined a book club, even tried my hand at salsa dancing. Every now and then, I catch a glimpse of Jack around town. He looks older now, worn down by his mistakes and misfortunes. Life didn't turn out the way I expected. But you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. Because now, for the first time in a long time, I'm truly, completely, happily me. So, I've always been the weird one in my family. You know, the black sheep and all that. I'm Ella Thompson, 29 years old now, but I felt like I don't fit in for pretty much forever. Growing up, I was the oldest kid of doctors Margaret and Robert Thompson. Yeah, my parents were big shots, but none of that good stuff ever really came my way. Nah, all the perks went to my younger twin brothers, Jack and Oliver. From the second those two popped out, it was like I became invisible to my parents. It started off small, you know? They'd get a bigger piece of cake or a new toy. But as we got older, it got way worse and super obvious. I remember when I turned 10. I'd been dropping hints for ages about this art set I saw in a shop window. Nothing crazy, just a basic kit with some decent paints and brushes. When my birthday rolled around, I was so pumped to open my one present, and what do I find? A freaking math workbook. When I hit my teenage years, the favoritism got even more in your face. Family trips were all about what the boys wanted. If Jack felt like skiing, boom, we're off to the slopes. If Oliver was into surfing that year, hello beach vacation. My ideas? Always got shot down or ignored. College applications. Man, that's a touchy subject. When I was 17, I fell in love with art restoration. I'd hang out at the local museum for hours, bugging the staff with questions about how they fixed up old art. When I brought up studying art restoration in college, you'd think I'd said I wanted to join the circus or something. Art restoration? Mom laughed. Ella, get real. That's not a proper job. Yeah, Ella, Jack butted in with this smug look. Why don't you do something useful, like become a doctor? I'll never forget how proud my parents looked when Jack said that. It was a look I'd never seen them give me. Even though they didn't have my back, I was determined to make it happen. When college acceptance letters started showing up, I was over the moon to find out I'd scored a scholarship to study art restoration. I remember running into the kitchen, waving the letter around like a crazy person. Mom, Dad, I got a scholarship. Mom barely looked up from her medical journal. That's nice, honey. Did you hear the boys got perfect scores on their SATs? The day I left for college was so different from when the twins would leave 2 years later. I packed up my second-hand laptop and thrift store clothes, getting ready to take the bus to my not-so-fancy state school. My parents were too caught up in their work to even give me a ride to the bus station. But there was one person who actually saw me for who I was. My grandma, Elizabeth. She showed up that day, and right before I was about to leave, she pulled me aside. Ella, sweetie, she said, pushing a small envelope into my hand. I'm so proud of you. Don't ever forget that. Inside the envelope was a check, not enough to change my whole life, but enough to make things a bit easier. But more than the money, it was the fact that she actually noticed me that meant everything. So, college was kind of a mixed bag for me. On one hand, I was finally free from always being compared to Jack and Oliver. I could really dive into my studies without feeling like I was in some weird competition for attention. But on the other hand, money was tight. Like, really tight. While I was barely getting by on my scholarship and working part-time jobs, I'd hear about all the fancy stuff my brothers were up to through family calls and social media. Fancy frat parties, spring break trips to crazy places, internships at big-shot hospitals, all paid for by our parents, of course. Time went by, and I threw myself into my studies like crazy. Art restoration became more than just what I wanted to do for a job, it was my escape, my happy place. There was something really satisfying about bringing beauty back to old, forgotten pieces, about showing the hidden potential under layers of neglect and damage. In my last year, I scored an internship at this small but respected museum. It wasn't fancy work, mostly cleaning and organizing stuff, but it was a way in. I was over the moon. When I called home to share the news, my mother's response was exactly what I expected, lukewarm at best. Oh, that's nice, dear, she said, sounding distracted. Did you hear about Jack's research paper? It's being published in a major medical journal. I held back a sigh. That's great, Mom. Listen, I was thinking of coming home for a weekend soon. Maybe we could. Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea, she cut me off quick. Your father and I are going to be really busy. We're helping the boys with their research papers. You understand, right? As I hung up the phone, I felt that familiar mix of anger and hurt building up in my chest. But this time, there was something else too. A little spark of defiance, of determination. I looked around my tiny dorm room, at the art books piled up on my desk, at the half-finished restoration project taking up most of my floor. This was my world now, one I had built for myself despite everything. Screw them, I muttered to the empty room. I don't need their approval. But even as I said it, a part of me knew it wasn't true. As much as I tried to deny it, a small part of me still wanted my parents to recognize me, still hoped that one day they'd see me for who I really was. So, graduation day came and went without much fuss from my family. My big moment was marked by a quick dinner at some chain restaurant. So, Ella, what's next? Dad asked, barely looking up from his menu. I sat up straight, trying to sound confident. I actually got a job offer, in one of the museums in New York. Dad frowned. I don't know, Ella. New York is expensive. How much does this job pay? I felt my face get hot as I mumbled the not-so-impressive starting salary. The disappointment on their faces was super obvious. The rest of the dinner was a blur of thinly veiled criticism and comparisons to Jack and Oliver's academic awesomeness. As we were leaving the restaurant, Grandma Elizabeth pulled me aside. Don't let them dim your light, my dear, she whispered, pressing a small envelope into my hand. Go to New York. Chase your dreams. Inside the envelope was a check, enough to cover my first month's rent in the city. I hugged her tight, trying not to cry. The next few years were crazy. I threw myself into my work, slowly but surely making a name for myself in the world of art restoration. It was during this time that I met Noah. Noah was a struggling graphic designer with a nice smile and this infectious passion for his work. We clicked right away over our shared love of art and our experiences as underdogs in our fields. After dating for a while, I decided it was time for Noah to meet my family. From the second we sat down, it was clear my parents had other ideas. They bombarded Noah with questions, each one more pointed than the last. So, Noah, Dad started, trying to sound casual but failing, what exactly are your long-term career prospects? Noah shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. Well, I'm building my client base. It takes time, but I'm making progress. Mom jumped in. And your current income? Is it enough to support a family? I felt my face get hot. Mom, that's not. It's okay, Ella, Noah said, squeezing my hand under the table. I'm not where I want to be money-wise yet, Dr. Thompson, but I'm working hard to get there. The interrogation kept going throughout dinner. With each question, I could see Noah's confidence taking a hit, and my own anger rising. As we were leaving, Mom pulled me aside. Ella, honey, I know you think you care for this boy, but you need to be realistic. You've already chosen a challenging career path. Don't make it worse by attaching yourself to someone with no real future. Mom, I hissed, shocked at how blunt she was being. Dad joined in. Your mother's right, Ella. You need to think about your future. This Noah seems nice enough, but is he really good enough for you? You could do so much better. I stood there, speechless, as years of pent-up frustration threatened to explode. How dare they judge Noah? How dare they once again dismiss my choices? So, as Noah and I started planning our wedding, reality hit us hard. Our combined savings were pretty pathetic, barely enough for a simple ceremony. One night, after staring at budget spreadsheets for hours, I decided to bring it up with my parents. Maybe they'd want to chip in. Mom, Dad, I started hesitantly during our weekly phone call. Noah and I have set a date for the wedding. We're trying to keep costs down, but I was wondering if maybe you'd like to help out a little? Even just with the planning? The silence on the other end of the line was so long and awkward. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice cold as ice. Ella, you're an adult now. If you've chosen to marry this person, then you need to handle the consequences yourself. I hung up feeling like crap, but not really surprised. Once again, Grandma Elizabeth swooped in to save the day. When I told her about the situation, she didn't hesitate to help. My dear, she said, her voice warm over the phone, I may not be able to give you the wedding of your dreams, but I want to help make your day special. She sent over some money that, while not a ton, made a huge difference to our plans. The wedding day arrived, and I had this mix of excitement and nerves churning in my stomach. The community center we'd rented was simple, but looked nice, decorated with wildflowers and twinkly lights. Our small group of friends had pitched in, helping with everything from the decorations to the homemade cake. As I walked down the makeshift aisle, Noah's face lit up with a smile that made all the struggle worth it. For a moment, I forgot about everything else, the money stress, my family being jerks, and just soaked in the love radiating from his eyes. The bubble burst as soon as I caught sight of my family. Mom and Dad sat stiffly in the front row, looking bored and disgusted. I overheard Mom muttering to Dad about the tacky decorations and cheap food. Jack and Oliver were even worse, snickering in the corner and constantly on their phones. I tried to ignore them, focusing instead on our vows and the supportive faces of our friends. It wasn't until the next day that I realized just how cruel they could be. I woke up to a ton of notifications on my phone. Jack and Oliver had gone on social media, posting a bunch of unflattering photos from the wedding. "Congrats to our big sis on her special day," read one caption under a blurry photo of Noah and me cutting our homemade cake. "Nothing says true love like a dollar store wedding." Another post showed a picture of the buffet table next to a photo of a fancy meal from some high-end restaurant. Ella's wedding versus our average Tuesday lunch. Guess which one's which? The comments section was a war zone. Some relatives were shocked at the brothers' behavior. "This is completely unacceptable. You should be ashamed of yourselves," wrote Aunt Sarah. But others seemed to think it was funny. Savage but true. "That wedding looked like a homeless convention," commented our cousin Tim. I felt sick reading through the comments. But what really broke my heart was seeing my parents' responses. Instead of telling their sons off, they were actually encouraging them. Mom had commented, "Boys will be boys. It's just a bit of harmless fun." I didn't call them and demand an apology. I just decided to forget about them for a while. So, 6 months after our wedding, it was time for the annual Thompson family reunion. Even though I was worried about it, Noah thought I should go, hoping it might be a chance to clear the air. Man, were we wrong. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I managed to keep it together for the first hour, making polite conversation and avoiding my immediate family as much as I could. But then I overheard Jack bragging about his latest fancy vacation, paid for by our parents, of course. Something inside me just snapped. "Must be nice," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "To have Mommy and Daddy bankroll your entire life." The room went dead quiet. Jack stared at me, his mouth hanging open. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," I shot back, years of pent-up frustration finally boiling over. "You and Oliver have been handed everything on a silver platter, while I've had to fight for every scrap of recognition or support." Mom stepped forward, her face red with anger. "Now, Ella, you're being ridiculous. We've always treated you children equally." I let out a bitter laugh. "Equally? Are you kidding me? Let's talk about equal, shall we?" I started counting off on my fingers. Private school tuition for the boys, public school for me. Brand new cars for their 16th birthdays, nothing for mine. And let's not forget the crowning achievement, $300,000 for their Ivy League medical educations, while I had to scrape by on scholarships and loans. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, all eyes on our family's dirty laundry being aired so publicly. Mom's voice was ice cold when she spoke. "If you're so obsessed with money, Ella, perhaps you should have married someone rich instead of your poor husband." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Noah, who had been silently supporting me, stiffened beside me. "How dare you?" I hissed, feeling tears in my eyes. "Noah is worth 10 of you. He actually loves me for who I am, not for how I can make him look good to his country club friends." The reunion turned into total chaos. Everyone was throwing accusations, bringing up old grudges, and years of resentment came pouring out. In the middle of all the shouting, a strong voice cut through the noise. "Enough." Everyone turned to see Grandma Elizabeth standing up, her usually kind face looking stern and angry. "I have watched this family tear itself apart for years, and I won't stand for it anymore," she declared. "Margaret, Robert, your treatment of Ella has been shameful. And you boys," she turned to Jack and Oliver, "your cruelty towards your sister is unforgivable." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Mom, never one to back down, spat out, "Mother, you don't understand. Ella has always been difficult, always causing problems." "No, Margaret," Grandma interrupted. "The only problem here is your blatant favoritism and inability to see the damage you've done. I looked around the room, at the shocked faces of my relatives, at my grandmother's resolute stance, at my parents' anger, and my brother's smug expressions. In that moment, something inside me broke and then came back together differently. "I'm done," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm done trying to win your approval, done trying to be part of this toxic family. Noah and I are leaving, and don't bother trying to contact us." The months that followed were tough. Noah was my rock through it all. He held me when the sadness hit, celebrated the small victories, and never once made me feel guilty for the family drama I'd brought into our lives. So, life has this weird way of throwing you for a loop when you least expect it. It all kicked off with a phone call. Noah had been working his butt off for weeks, putting everything he had into a pitch for this big-time client. When he answered the phone that sunny Tuesday morning, I could tell from the look on his face that something major had gone down. "We got it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ella, we got the contract." The next few months were crazy. Noah's little design firm blew up overnight, the fancy client opening doors we never thought we'd see. Suddenly, we weren't just scraping by, we were rolling in it. But with our new success came this unexpected complication. My phone started blowing up with notifications, friend requests from family members I'd long since blocked, messages from distant relatives suddenly wanting to catch up. And then, the call I'd been dreading. "Ella, sweetheart." My mother's voice, sickly sweet, came through the line. "We've heard the wonderful news about Noah's business. We always knew you two would make it." The bullshit kept coming. My father got on the line, talking about how proud they were, how they'd always believed in us. I listened in stunned silence, getting angrier with each lie. "We'd love to see you," Mom chirped. "Maybe we could all have dinner, celebrate your success as a family?" That snapped me out of it. "As a family?" I repeated, my voice hard. "We haven't been a family for a long time, and that's not going to change just because our bank account has." I stuck to my guns. When my parents showed up at our door out of the blue, I didn't let them in. When they sent fancy gifts, I sent them right back unopened. Instead, Noah and I focused on building the life we'd always wanted. We worked hard, saved smart, and eventually found ourselves signing the papers for a beautiful apartment right in the middle of the city. Excited to share our happiness, I posted a photo on social media. It was a simple shot, Noah and I, keys in hand, standing in front of our new home. Next to it was a picture from our most recent visit with Grandma Elizabeth, her proud smile beaming at the camera. "New beginnings and old love," I captioned it. Grateful for those who've been there through it all. New home, family. As I hit post, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. This was my family now, Noah, Grandma Elizabeth, and the friends who had stood by us through thick and thin. We had built this life for ourselves, despite the odds, despite all the people who said we couldn't do it. The soft evening light was coming through the windows of our new apartment as I was busy in the kitchen, getting dinner ready for Noah and Grandma Elizabeth. It was our first real family dinner in our new place, and I wanted everything to be just right. The sudden, aggressive pounding on the front door shattered that peace in an instant. "Ella, open up. We know you're in there." My blood ran cold. I'd know those voices anywhere, Jack and Oliver. Before I could even react, the door burst open. My brothers stormed in, their faces twisted with anger. I barely had time to see Noah jumping to his feet before Jack was in my face, jabbing an accusing finger at my chest. "You manipulative little bitch," he snarled. "We always knew you were playing the long game, but this? This is low, even for you." I stumbled back, shocked by how much venom was in his voice. "What are you talking about?" Oliver laughed, and it was a harsh, ugly sound. "Don't play dumb, Ella. We saw your little social media post. Showing off your new apartment, posing with Grandma. You think we can't put two and two together?" It hit me what they were thinking. "You think Grandma bought us this apartment?" "We know she did," Jack spat. "You've been playing the poor, neglected child for years, worming your way into her good graces. And now you've manipulated her into making you the sole heir. I felt a surge of anger, straightening my spine. You have no idea what you're talking about. Noah and I bought this apartment ourselves. With our own money that we earned. Oliver sneered, his eyes darting around the room. Right, sure you did. Where is the old bat anyway? Hiding her away so we can't talk sense into her? That crazy old woman should be in a cemetery by now. I can't wait for her to kick the bucket so I can sell her house and live it up. The room fell deadly silent. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined those horrific words. Then, a quiet voice spoke from the doorway of the guest room. So this is how you truly feel about me. All heads turned to see Grandma Elizabeth standing there, her face a mask of shock and disappointment. The color drained from Jack and Oliver's faces as they realized their grandmother had heard every word. Grandma, Jack stammered, we didn't mean. Elizabeth held up a hand, shutting him up. I've heard enough, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I finally understand who truly values me and who sees me as nothing more than a meal ticket. I found my voice, strengthened by my grandmother's presence. I think you both need to leave. Now. For a moment, it looked like they might argue. But one look at Grandma's face, a mixture of hurt and resolve, seemed to deflate them. They slunk towards the door, muttering weak excuses. The aftermath of that crazy evening hit like a storm. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, constantly reminding me of the mess that had blown up. Mom's name popped up on the screen for what felt like the millionth time. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Ella, her voice was sharp, not sounding like a mom at all. You need to fix this. Your grandmother is furious with the boys. You need to smooth things over, tell her it was all a misunderstanding. I let out a bitter laugh. A misunderstanding? They broke into my home and said they couldn't wait for her to die so they could sell her house. How exactly is that a misunderstanding? They didn't mean it, Dad chimed in, apparently on speakerphone. You know how the boys can be. They were just upset. Upset about what? I challenged. That Noah and I bought an apartment with our own money? That Grandma loves me? Mom's voice turned sickly sweet. Sweetheart, we know you've always felt left out. But you need to think about what's best for the family. Your brothers deserve that inheritance. Don't be selfish. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. Selfish? You're calling me selfish? After years of favoritism, of dismissing my achievements, of treating Noah and me like second-class citizens? And now you have the audacity to demand I give up an inheritance I never even asked for? Now, Ella, Dad started, but I cut him off. No. I'm done. I'm done with the manipulation, the guilt trips, all of it. Don't call me again. Don't text. Don't show up at my door. We're through. Over the next few days, I blocked their numbers, along with Jack and Oliver's. It was painful, like cutting off a diseased limb, but necessary for healing to begin. As the dust settled, I found myself surrounded by a different kind of warmth. Grandma Elizabeth, now fully aware of the family dynamics she had long suspected, became an even more constant presence in our lives. Aunt Sarah, who had reached out after the wedding fiasco, became a regular visitor. I always knew you were special, Ella, she said, hugging me tightly. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner. Other relatives, cousins, and distant aunts and uncles who had witnessed my family's mistreatment over the years, reached out with messages of support. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing genuine relationships to flourish where there had once been only obligation. Noah's family, bless them, wrapped me in a blanket of unconditional love. His parents, who had watched from the sidelines as my own family tore me down, went out of their way to make me feel cherished. Noah and I threw ourselves into making our new apartment a home. Each piece of furniture, each photo on the wall, was a testament to the life we were building together, a life founded on mutual respect, support, and love.